Listen carefully. This is your final awakening ceremony. Those of you who fail today will spend the rest of your lives as civilians. You'll attend regular universities, work regular jobs, and live regular lives. For the next 3 months, you can still work on your physical conditioning to improve your odds, but statistically speaking, your chances are already close to zero. The instructor's words resonated in the hearts of every student in the gymnasium, including Moon, who sat near the middle of the assembled students. Next to him was his girlfriend, Sarah. Their relationship had been deteriorating recently, but today wasn't the day to think about that. Today was about awakening his class. 2 centuries had passed since the collapse, when rifts tore through reality and flooded the world with creatures that belonged in nightmares. Humanity had nearly fallen, but luckily, the Age of Awakeners arrived, individuals whose bodies evolved, granting them classes and abilities that defied anything humans thought was possible outside of fantasy books. The war had been brutal, lasting decades, but eventually humanity clawed back its survival. Now, the age of 18 represented a possibility, a chance to join the ranks of those who shaped the world rather than merely existed in it. We'll proceed alphabetically by first name, the instructor continued, gesturing to the crystal on the table before him. You know the drill. Place your hands on the stone. If you've awakened, it will respond. If not, you know your fate. Aaron Wells, a boy from the front row, stood, his legs visibly trembling as he approached the podium. Moon watched as Aaron pressed both palms against the stone's surface. After a few seconds had passed, light bloomed within the sphere. The phenomenon was brilliant and sudden. A spectral shield materialized in the air beside Aaron before fading away. A powerful guardian knight class. Congratulations, Aaron. The gymnasium erupted in applause. Moon clapped along with everyone else. The more awakeners, the stronger humanity was. 3 more names were called, of which 2 were successes and 1 failure. The girl who failed walked back to her seat with her head down, and the conversations around her died to uncomfortable silence before resuming moments later, completely ignoring her existence. Moon's heart hammered against his ribs. Sarah sat perfectly still beside him, with a composed expression. Sarah Vixen. Sarah stood without hesitation, smoothing down her uniform as she walked to the podium. Sarah wore black tights and a short skirt, which highlighted her curves. Moon watched her go, willing the stone to respond. She was still his girlfriend, even if things had been hectic for the past few weeks. They'd been together for almost 2 years after all. Sarah placed her hands on the awakening stone. Barely a second had gone by before a soft, golden, and translucent threads began to form as a phantom above her. Life Binder class. That's a rare and powerful support class. Excellent result, Sarah. Your class is sought after by many guilds. With enough hard work, you will be able to enter the top guilds and reach great heights. Clap, clap, clap. The applause was thunderous. Normal support classes were rare and highly valued, not to mention a rare variant. Sarah would have her pick of teams, academies, and opportunities. She smiled as she returned to her seat, but Moon noticed she didn't look at him, ignoring him completely. His smile disappeared and a frown formed on his face, but before he could speak to her about it, Moon heard his own name being called. Moon Outlaw. I will talk to her later. As Moon walked to the podium, he could feel every eye in the gymnasium tracking his movement. The awakening stone sat on the table, still faintly glowing from the previous student's success. Moon stopped before it, staring at his own reflection in its shiny surface. Moon pressed his palms against the stone, which was cool to the touch and smooth like glass. Moon waited, focusing everything he had on that single point of contact, trying to feel something, anything that might indicate a response. The stone remained unresponsive under his hands, its light neither brightening nor changing. The seconds crawled past rather quickly before the instructor sighed, shaking his head. That's enough. Understanding dawned Moon. Instructor, give me just a moment. Moon, step back. The instructor spoke with a harsh tone. He had seen this too many times, and he grew frustrated when it occurred constantly. Moon's hands fell away from the stone. Awakening failed. Next, Natalie. the instructor called out. As Moon walked back to his seat, the instructor looked at his back with hidden pity. Sigh, he's an orphan and a null. He will struggle in life. Null was what they called people who failed all their awakening attempts. People with null potential and dim futures. It had started as slang among awakeners and spread until it became an insult among children and teenagers. Moon kept walking, his vision tunneling. He found his seat and sat down. Sarah looked at Moon, the way someone might look at a stranger who'd stumbled in front of them on the street. Her expression was perfectly composed, but in that moment, Moon understood with absolute clarity that whatever had existed between them was already over. She'd just been waiting for confirmation that he wasn't worth the effort of a proper goodbye. Moon wasn't dense enough not to understand. Sarah had prepared herself for this moment. If he failed, she would break it off. If he succeeded, she might continue, and it seemed like it was the former. Sarah turned away, redirecting her attention to the podium where the next student was approaching the awakening stone. Moon sat in his seat and stared at nothing in particular, the instructor's voice calling out more names fading into background noise. Around him, the ceremony continued. More successes, more failures, more futures being decided in the span of seconds. The voices around Moon had become distant, underwater sounds that barely registered, until one voice cut through the fog with perfect clarity. Sarah, want to join our party? Marcus stood at the end of their row, one hand extended politely. Marcus carried himself with confidence and prestige fitting his background. His awakening had also drawn one of the loudest reactions of the ceremony. He had awakened a Bladestorm, a variant swordsman class known for its raw offensive power. Hearing the proposal, Sarah's expression remained neutral, but after a pause that lasted just long enough to seem deliberate, she accepted his hand and stood. We could use someone with your talent and wits, Marcus continued, his smile widening. Adrian's already confirmed he's joining. Lena and Mark too. With you as our lifebinder, we'd have one of the strongest compositions in the entire academy. We will do amazing in the first sanctuary. The names alone carried weight. They were all powerful awakeners with strong classes that complemented each other in a team setting. Together, they'd form a party that could hold its own ground in the first sanctuary. Of course, this could only occur if they were placed in the same base. If they weren't, then they would have to wait until they headed to a more powerful base that the party could agree on. The first sanctuary was the name of the land where humans had the ability to travel to. It was a different world, where races from all over the universe fought over resources and power. Humans were one of the weakest races in the sanctuary, due to their late arrival and weak bodies. Moon watched Marcus's face, cataloging every detail of that self-satisfied smirk. Rich second-generation trash. That's what people called students like Marcus behind their backs, though never to their faces. His family owned a chain of supply stores that catered specifically to awakeners. He'd grown up around power, around success, around people who never heard the word no. Everything he wanted, he eventually got. And apparently that now included Sarah. Despite the hollow ache in his chest, despite the word null still echoing in his brain, despite the sensation that his entire future had just collapsed, Moon's expression became cold. He wouldn't give Marcus the satisfaction he wanted. Their eyes met for a fraction of a second. Moon's expression was flat, offering nothing. There was no anger, despair, or any negative emotion that Marcus would enjoy. Marcus's smirk faltered slightly, as if he'd been expecting something different and found the lack of response somehow unsatisfying. Give me a moment. I'll join you in a minute, Sarah said, her voice quiet but audible in the brief lull of conversation around them. Sure, take your time. Marcus's smile returned, easy and confident. He gestured to the other 3 members of his forming party, who'd gathered near the gymnasium's side exit. We'll be over there. Don't keep us waiting too long. He walked away, and Moon heard laughter drift back from the group. Adrian said something inaudible, and Marcus responded with another laugh, louder this time. Sarah turned to face Moon directly for the first time since he'd failed his awakening. Moon met her gaze and waited. He knew what was coming, had known, before she'd even accepted Marcus's hand. Maybe he'd known for weeks, during all those small moments when she'd pulled away and created distance. Sarah opened her mouth to speak. "Moon, we're breaking up. Live a good life and don't get into trouble." Sarah offered no explanation beyond that. Moon looked at her coldly. "Live a good life. Don't get into trouble. How noble of you, Sarah." She was ending their 2-year relationship in the same gymnasium where he'd just been branded a null, surrounded by classmates who'd witnessed both humiliations. And her parting words were hollow pleasantries that someone would offer a random person they'd just met. Live a good life. As if his life hadn't just been fundamentally limited by his failure to awaken. As if the upcoming years wouldn't be spent watching people like her ascend to heights he could never reach. Don't get into trouble. The addition almost made him laugh. What trouble could a null possibly get into that would matter? He'd be sorting inventory in some warehouse or processing paperwork in some forgotten office while she was clearing rifts and making a name for herself in the first sanctuary. But what really made him realize how foolish he had been was her new party. Sarah had decided to team up with the same person who had many fights with Moon throughout the academy years. Sarah knew all of this, witnessed it. She'd even complained about Marcus once or twice in the beginning. Moon had so much he could say. About her timing choice. About the fact that she couldn't even give him the courtesy of a real conversation. Just these empty words designed to make her feel like she'd done the decent thing. But he said nothing, because if he did, she'd get to walk away feeling like they'd had a proper ending, like she'd handled this maturely. Or worse, she'd get to see him hurt and take that image with her as confirmation that she'd made the right choice. He wouldn't give her either. Moon turned, walking away with no visible reaction on his face, as if nothing that had happened today mattered. Behind him, he heard Sarah's quiet exhale. Her footsteps moved in the opposite direction, toward the side exit where Marcus and his new party waited. Moon pushed through the main doors and stepped into the sun. The campus stretched out before him. Students clustered in groups across the quad, celebrating successes. Moon walked past them all, heading for the gates. Nobody called out to him and nobody tried to stop him. Share to your friends. Chapter 1. Class Awakening Ceremony. Tip: you can use left, right keyboard keys to browse between chapters. Tap the middle of the screen to reveal reading options. If you find any errors, non-standard content, ads redirect, broken links, etc., please let us know so we can fix it as soon as possible. Report. Chapter 1. Class Awakening Ceremony. Back in his small apartment, Moon glanced at the time with a firm but powerless gaze. To say that he wasn't overwhelmed by his failure to awaken would be a lie. How could he not be? His dreams, his ambitions of becoming an awakener had been nullified in the span of seconds. And what made everything worse was that the summoning was about to begin. There were 2 ways a person could enter the first sanctuary for the first time. The first was at midnight immediately following their awakening. The second was on the night after their 18th birthday, regardless of awakening status. In mere hours, Moon would be thrust into the dangerous world of the first sanctuary. The first sanctuary was no ordinary place. Even awakeners struggled to survive there, especially in the beginning. The danger wasn't inherently fatal because new arrivals typically spawned inside bases controlled and maintained by other humans. Safety existed within those walls. It was only when you ventured outside, when you stayed too long hunting monsters beyond the perimeter, that the real threats emerged. For someone like Moon, someone who hadn't awakened, the summoning served a different purpose. He'd be transported to the first sanctuary, the world would scan him, recognize his lack of potential, and send him back through one of the established portals. A formality, a final confirmation of his status as a null. Humans who didn't awaken simply returned after their brief transportation. Many portals existed between both worlds, stable gateways that those who'd already visited could use freely. Awakeners traveled back and forth regularly, treating the first sanctuary like a second home, a proving ground, a source of resources and power. But those portals were selective. Attempting to enter without the first sanctuary's recognition meant death. The portals themselves would reject an unrecognized body, tearing it apart at a molecular level. Moon had seen videos of the aftermath once, back when he'd still believed he'd awaken. A careless civilian had tried to follow an Awakener team through a portal as a prank. They'd found him in pieces. The summoning ritual solved that problem. When a person was naturally transported during their first summoning, something nobody could fully explain, the first sanctuary acknowledged them, scanned them, gave them an identity within its system. After that, they could enter and exit through the portals however they liked, recognized as valid entities by whatever force governed that world. Moon stared at his phone. 8:47 p.m. The summoning would occur at midnight. 3 hours and 13 minutes. His apartment felt smaller than usual. One room serving as a bedroom, living area, and kitchen. A bathroom barely large enough to turn around in. Cheap furniture he'd bought secondhand. It was all he could afford on his part-time wages, especially after his parents had passed 2 years ago in a rift breach. He'd thought awakening would change everything. It would give him the power to ensure that he could avenge them and he could protect people he cared about and cared about him. Or so he thought. It would lift him out of this cramped existence into something better, something meaningful. Instead, he was still here, powerless, and in 3 hours, the world would confirm it officially. Moon walked to his small window and looked out over the city. Lights stretched toward the horizon. Thousands of people living their lives. Somewhere out there, Sarah was probably celebrating with Marcus and his party, planning their future and imagining the adventures they'd have. He closed the blinds and his eyes. You are being summoned to the first sanctuary in 1 minute. Prepare accordingly. Moon opened his eyes as the ethereal voice entered his ears. The same voice that everyone his age and all newly awakened should be hearing at the same time, across the entire world. A phenomenon that defied explanation, understood by nobody but experienced by all. He was still lying on his bed, fully clothed. He hadn't bothered changing. What was the point? 5. Let's just get this over and done with. He sighed, staring at the water-stained ceiling of his apartment. 4, 3, 2, 1. You are entering the first sanctuary. The world dissolved. It wasn't painful, but it wasn't comfortable either. Moon felt his body come apart and reform in the same instant, like being pulled through a space too small for him to fit and somehow making it through anyway. Colors bled together, then separated. Sound became texture, texture became light, and then everything snapped back into focus. Moon stood in a stone courtyard. He blinked, his vision adjusting. To his surprise, other people materialized around him in flashes of light, appearing in ones and twos. Some gasped in wonder. Others immediately looked around in fear. They were easy to identify. They were people who hadn't awakened their talents. The sky above was different from that on Earth. 2 moons hung in the darkness, one pale blue and one deep crimson, neither matching the moon from his world. Stars formed constellations he didn't recognize. This was the first sanctuary. More and more people started materializing around him, until Moon felt like nearly 1,000 people were next to him, summoned to the same courtyard. He didn't recognize anyone from his high school, nor did he want to. Then, a spirit appeared in the air. She had a beautiful, curvaceous body, and a smile that would topple planets rather than mere kingdoms. Without speaking, she clicked her hand after taking a quick glance at the crowd, her eyes scanning every single person like a hawk. Once her click registered in the ears of everyone present, tens of people started disappearing gradually, and Moon knew exactly what that was. The nulls are being transported back to Earth. I guess it's time, Moon thought with a bitter feeling, as he closed his eyes, no longer looking at the 2 moons that he would never see again in his lifetime. Within moments, 20% of the people present were sent back to Earth. Welcome to the first sanctuary. The voice returned, clearer now, resonating not through his ears but directly in his mind. All around the courtyard, the other students stopped moving, stopped talking, their attention drawn inward to the same ethereal presence. You are the chosen ones, those deemed worthy by the world itself to walk between realities. Here, in the first sanctuary, you will find both rewards beyond imagination and dangers that will test the very limits of your potential. Moon's confusion deepened with each word. Chosen ones? Worthy? The voice was addressing all of them equally, making no distinction between those who had awakened and those who hadn't. Within these walls you are safe. The bases scattered across the first sanctuary serve as havens for your kind. Beyond them lie territories filled with creatures of increasing strength, resources of immense value, and mysteries waiting to be uncovered. Why was he still here? Your status panels will guide you. Your abilities will grow. Your choices will shape your path. Treat this world with the respect it demands, and it will reward you accordingly. Share to your friends. Chapter 2, First Sanctuary. Tip: you can use left, right keyboard keys to browse between chapters. Tap the middle of the screen to reveal reading options. If you find any errors, non-standard content, ads redirect, broken links, etc., please let us know so we can fix it as soon as possible. Report. Chapter 2, First Sanctuary. Moon's hands began to tremble. This wasn't right. The voice was explaining the basics of the first sanctuary as if he belonged here, as if he had the same right to be present as the awakened students around him. May your journey be prosperous. Welcome once more to the first sanctuary. The presence faded, leaving behind a profound silence that was quickly filled by excited chatter. Students began comparing notes, discussing what they'd heard, marveling at their surroundings. Moon stood frozen, his mind racing. An error. It had to be an error. Some terrible glitch in whatever system governed the summoning process. His luck, already abysmal today, had somehow managed to get worse. Instead of being cleanly rejected and sent home, he'd slipped through a crack, been overlooked by the mechanism that should have filtered him out. His breathing quickened, and panic crept up his spine like ice water. He had no class or abilities. Essentially, he had no way to defend himself if he left the safety of this base, and from what he understood, people couldn't just leave the first sanctuary whenever they wanted on their first visit. There was a minimum duration, usually a week, before the return portals would accept a new arrival. He'd have to survive here for an entire week with nothing but his baseline human capabilities. No system interface to track his health, no skills to call upon, no power to protect him, and no food to eat. Moon's eyes moved around the courtyard. You may check your status by thinking or uttering the word status. The spirit's voice returned with this final instruction. It was common knowledge, really. Every child knew this from the moment they learned about awakeners. But hearing it directly from the spirit made Moon respond instinctively, despite knowing he had no class to display. Status, he whispered. Light coalesced before his eyes, forming into a translucent panel that only he could see. Name Moon. Race, human. Class, classless. Level, 1, 0%. Lives, 1. Strength, 10. Agility, 12. Constitution, 12. Mana, 15. Attribute points, 0. Skills, none. Talent, Grim Reaper. Class skill, class slot 0/1. Moon stared at the panel, his mind grinding to a halt. How could he have a status while being a null? That made no sense. Nulls were rejected by the system entirely. They didn't get panels. They didn't get stats. They certainly didn't get talents or class skills. Was something wrong with the awakening orb? Had it malfunctioned? Maybe his awakening hadn't failed after all. Before he could process this revelation, the world dissolved again. This time, Moon appeared inside a massive base with huge, sturdy walls. Other students materialized nearby, filling what appeared to be some sort of plaza. The architecture around was solid, defensible, unmistakably designed for safety. Moon looked around, trying to orient himself, when a girl with big round eyes and 2 ponytails approached him. She looked young, probably one of the new awakeners, and radiated nervous energy. Hey, I'm kind of new here. I just entered the first sanctuary. Can I form a team with you? She looked at Moon with an expectant gaze. Moon glanced at her for a second, his thoughts racing. Getting a team would be ideal for survival. He still didn't understand what was happening with his status, so playing it safe made sense. Besides, if she was an awakened, she wouldn't be completely helpless. Having someone with actual abilities would increase his odds dramatically. Sure, but can you give me a moment? I'm just sorting out some things. The relief on her face was immediate. Her breath that was caught suddenly left her chest. Oh, thank you. Yes, of course, take your time. She stepped back slightly, her eyes darting around the base with undisguised curiosity. Moon turned his attention back to his status panel, focusing on the entries that made no sense. Class, classless, description. You are an anomaly. Whilst everyone is tied to a class from their birth, you are free from the restrictions of the system. You are able to learn any skill from any class based on your comprehension or from fruitful encounters. His breath caught. Learn any skill from any class? That was impossible. Classes were rigid by design. A mage couldn't learn sword techniques. A knight couldn't cast spells. The system enforced those boundaries absolutely. But apparently he had no such restrictions. His eyes moved to the next entry. Talent. Grim Reaper. Description. You are the Grim Reaper. You gain 5x the lives from the beasts you kill. Moon's mind reeled. Lives were the currency of progression in the first sanctuary. When awakeners killed monsters, they absorbed a portion of the creature's essence, gaining what the system called lives, that could be used for evolving skills, trading, and most importantly to live. The first sanctuary had multiple zones. Some zones, once you die there, you will lose a single life. But there were other zones where, once you die, you lose tens or even hundreds of lives. 5 times the normal amount. That wasn't just good. That was extraordinary. Most talents offered minor percentage increases or small utility benefits. This was a complete multiplicative bonus on the fundamental resource of this world. His hands shook as he focused on the final entry. Class slot 0 to 1. Description. You are able to mirror a class you see in action for 24 hours. You gain the class skills of that class depending on your level. The class skills you gain can be turned to real skills based on your understanding and comprehension. Moon read it twice, then a third time. He could copy classes. Not permanently, but for 24 hours at a time. And more than that, if he understood the borrowed skills well enough, he could make them permanent. Real skills that would persist even after the mirrored class expired. His failure to awaken hadn't been a failure at all. It had been something else entirely. Something the awakening orb couldn't recognize because it fell outside the standard. He was an anomaly. Share to your friends. Chapter 3. Grim Reaper. Tip: you can use left, right keyboard keys to browse between chapters. Tap the middle of the screen to reveal reading options. If you find any errors, non-standard content, ads redirect, broken links, etc., please let us know so we can fix it as soon as possible. Report. Chapter 3. Grim Reaper. After understanding his situation, Moon felt a weight lift from his chest. The crushing pressure that had been suffocating him since the ceremony began to ease. In fact, the recent events had sprouted something important in his mind. Even the person he had trusted most, the one he'd wanted to spend the rest of his life with, had abandoned him at his lowest point. The lesson was clear and brutal. He couldn't afford to trust anyone easily anymore. Thinking back about their relationship, he was the one who had tried the most. She never really tried to do much, whether it was emotional or physical support. This ordeal had shown him who would stand by his side when things went wrong, and the answer was clear. No one would. He would remember that. Moon turned back to glance at the girl who had invited him earlier, but stopped short. She'd already gathered 2 other awakeners, a small group forming around her with surprising speed. She's good, Moon thought. Making connections wasn't exactly easy, especially in a place like this where everyone was sizing each other up. Yet she'd managed to assemble a whole team in the few minutes he'd been distracted. He walked over to join them. The girl's face lit up when she saw him approaching. You're done? Perfect timing. I found 2 more people. She gestured excitedly to the others. We should introduce ourselves properly. I'm Celine. Moon, he said simply. The larger of the 2 newcomers spoke next. He had a broad build, thick shoulders, and was quite tall. John. Tank class. Nothing fancy, just the basics. The other was a tall blonde woman, nearly matching Moon's height at around 1.8 meters. She carried herself with a certain poise, her eyes sharp and assessing. "Hey, I'm Alara. My class is an archer." Celine practically bounced on her heels. "What's your class, Moon?" "Mine is water mage." Moon didn't hesitate. "I'm a water mage." When he heard Celine, Moon had made a decision he'd copy her class. The reasoning was straightforward. As a mage, he wouldn't need to worry about equipment. No arrows to buy or maintain like Alara would need. No heavy armor or weapons like John. Just mana, which his status showed he had 15 points of, slightly above the human average. More importantly, mages stayed in the back line. He could position himself near Celine, observe how she used her skills, and learn from her technique while maintaining relative safety. And something about her suggested she wasn't simple. Not at all. The way she'd approached him, gathered the others, the confidence beneath her nervous energy. "Oh!" Celine's eyes widened with delight. "Another water mage. That's amazing. Do you have the same skills as... Why are they all gathering over there?" Moon cut in smoothly, gesturing toward a section of the hall where a large crowd was forming. Celine's attention shifted immediately, following his gesture. "Oh, that's the guild area. New awakeners can try their luck getting into a guild early. If you have a desirable class, healers, mages, stuff like that, some guilds will offer initial support. Resources, guidance, that kind of thing." "I see," Moon said. He studied the crowd for a moment. People pressed together, voices raised as they tried to catch the attention of guild representatives. The energy there was desperate, competitive. Everyone was trying to prove their worth, to secure an advantage that would help them survive longer. Neither John nor Alara seemed interested in joining the throng. John crossed his arms, content to observe from a distance. Alara's expression remained neutral, unbothered by the opportunity. Celine tilted her head. "None of you want to try? Guilds come with obligations," Alara said simply. "I'd rather see what the first sanctuary is like before I commit to anything." John nodded his agreement. "Same. Rather figure things out on our own first." Moon said nothing, but internally he agreed completely. The last thing he needed was being tied to a guild, a weak one at that. Better to stay independent, at least until he understood exactly what he was capable of. Celine considered this for a moment, then shrugged. "Fair enough. I just thought I'd ask. So, should we figure out what we're doing next? I heard there are basic training grounds where we can practice and get used to our abilities before venturing outside the base." The basic training ground was located inside the base itself. One of the primary benefits of having fortified bases was that stronger awakeners could capture and transport beasts back for weaker ones to practice against. Of course, this service wasn't cheap, and it benefited both parties. The strong earned money, and the weak gained crucial early experience. These training grounds allowed new awakeners to hunt contained beasts, gaining lives and experience in a controlled environment. With enough effort, you might accumulate enough experience to reach level 2 and earn additional stat points before venturing into the real dangers outside the walls. Moon had been saving money specifically for this. Getting an extra life and more stats before leaving the base wasn't just smart, it was potentially life-saving. Money could be earned back later by hunting beasts and selling equipment. But lives? Once you died, that was it. There were no second chances. "I'm in," Moon said. The others didn't object. They seemed agreeable, almost eager. So the group made their way through the base's stone corridors toward the training grounds. The entrance wasn't packed. Not many could afford the fee, especially fresh arrivals who'd spent their savings just trying to survive the outside world. Moon had been fortunate to have money saved from his part-time work, combined with the modest fund he received as an orphan. Even so, he'd barely managed to scrape together enough. An awakener stood at the entrance, an older man with scarred forearms and the confidence of someone who'd survived the first sanctuary long enough to make it a career. He looked up as they approached. $10,000 per person to enter. Celine pulled out her card without hesitation, practically bouncing with excitement. John and Alara followed suit, their movements calm and unbothered. For them, the fee was clearly a minor expense. Moon felt his stomach tighten. Even though he'd prepared himself mentally for this moment, watching the others pay so casually made the weight of it real. With this $10,000 spent, he'd have only $1,000 left in his savings. $1,000 to his name in both worlds. He pulled out his card, then scanned it. The machine beeped and the transaction went through. The man gestured for them to enter. Training Ground 3 is available. You'll find contained beasts at levels 1 to 3. Start with the weakest and work your way up. You have 2 hours. Moon stepped through the entrance, his mind already calculating. He needed to use every second of these 2 hours to his full advantage. He needed to get strong enough to earn money hunting outside with the group. Otherwise, with only $1,000 left and no job to return to in his world, homelessness wasn't just a possibility. It was a certainty. Share to your friends. Chapter 4: Forming a Team. Tip: you can use left, right keyboard keys to browse between chapters. Tap the middle of the screen to reveal reading options. If you find any errors, non-standard content, ads redirect, broken links, etc., please let us know so we can fix it as soon as possible. Report. Chapter 4: Forming a Team. Moon and the others were led deeper into the training facility, arriving at an area where beasts ranging from level 1 to level 3 were contained. The space was vast, divided into clearly marked sections with reinforced barriers separating each zone. Large signs indicated the difficulty of each area, ensuring no one accidentally wandered into something beyond their capabilities. Moon positioned himself beside Celine as they walked, deliberately keeping close. He needed to see her in action first, needed to witness her class abilities before he could mirror them and fill his empty slot. He still didn't know how, but he had a hunch that every awakener had about their class. He had a natural inclination that he needed to witness a class to be able to mirror it. The group made their way to the section marked for level 1 beasts. Inside the enclosed area, sheep-like creatures grazed peacefully, though these were far from ordinary livestock. Their horns were massive, curved, and sharp, easily the length of Moon's forearm. Their bodies were lean, muscular, with patchy wool that left sections of thick hide exposed. John moved first, activating some kind of defensive skill that caused his skin to take on a faint metallic sheen. He approached one of the creatures with his fists raised. Alara hung back, summoning a basic bow that materialized from light. She then knocked an arrow and took aim at the beasts. Moon stayed near the barrier, watching. He could feel a new sensation, an awareness he hadn't possessed before, like invisible threads extending from him toward each member of his group. He instinctively understood that he could pull on any of those threads, could activate his class slot ability on John's tank class or Alara's archer class right now if he chose to. But he didn't. He simply waited, his attention fixed on Celine. Celine, however, hadn't moved to attack yet. She turned to look at him, her head tilting slightly. "Why aren't you hunting like the others? Is everything all right?" Moon nodded. "Yeah, just zoned out a little. Thinking about something." Celine's response was a warm smile. "We don't have much time. Let's get to work." "Right," Moon said, but still didn't move forward. Fortunately, Celine seemed to take his hesitation as simple caution. She turned her attention to the nearest beast, extending her hand. Moon watched intently as mana gathered in her palm, coalescing into a sphere of water that hovered for just a moment before launching forward and striking one of the sheep creatures directly in the side. The moment he saw the skill activate, Moon felt the invisible thread connecting him to Celine pulse with possibility. He didn't hesitate. He pulled. Class slot 1 to 1. Class Elemental Mage. Level 1. Skills: Elemental Attack, 4 Element Affinity. Duration: 24 hours. New information flooded his mind like waves crashing against the seabed. He could feel it now, the pathways through which mana could flow, the shapes it could take. More details appeared as he focused on the skills themselves. 4 Element Affinity. Rank: Rare. Proficiency: 0%. Details: you have low affinity to the 4 elements: water, earth, wind, fire. Elemental Attack. Rank: Common. Proficiency, 0%. Details. You are able to conjure an elemental attack using mana and your affinity towards the element. Moon stared at the information, momentarily stunned. Celine wasn't a water mage at all. She was an elemental mage, someone with an affinity for all 4 primary elements. That wasn't just rare. Classes with multiple elemental affinities were considered exceptional, the kind that major guilds would compete to recruit. Her class was far from ordinary. It was powerful enough to make Moon question who she really was. He'd suspected she wasn't simple from the way she'd gathered their group so effortlessly, the confidence beneath her friendly demeanor. But this was beyond what he'd expected. Meeting her might have been the best stroke of luck he'd had in a long time. Moon composed himself quickly, pushing down his surprise. He needed to maintain his cover. As far as everyone else knew, he was just another water mage. Nothing special. He raised his hand, mimicking the gesture he'd seen Celine make. Mana began flowing through the pathways his newly acquired class provided. Water gathered in his palm, forming into a crude sphere. It wobbled slightly, less stable than Celine's had been, but still a sphere nonetheless. Sheep Bog. Level 1. Details. One of the weakest creatures with low potential, usually stays with the herd. He released it toward one of the sheep creatures. The water ball flew forward and splashed against the beast's flank. The creature bleated in surprise and turned toward him, its massive horns lowering. Not bad. Celine called out, already forming another attack. Your control looks a bit shaky, though. Try to compress the water more before you release it. Moon nodded, already forming another sphere, this time focusing on keeping it denser, more stable. He had 24 hours with this class. 24 hours to learn everything he could, to understand these skills deeply enough that maybe, just maybe, he could make them permanent. The sheep charged towards Moon with eyes glinting with malicious intent. Moon gathered himself and locked eyes with the sheep. He had studied enough to understand that level 1 beasts are dangerous enough to kill new awakeners, so he didn't take the sheep charging lightly. Rather, he took it seriously. Moon conjured another water ball and sent it hurling towards the charging sheep. Splash! The water crashed against the sheep, momentarily dazing it and stopping its charge completely. Moon took advantage of that momentary stun and conjured another ball of water. The water ball crashed once again, this time hitting the sheep cleanly in the head. The attacks were powerful and not to be scoffed at. Each attack weakened the sheep further. After 2 more water balls, the sheep succumbed to its injuries and fell to the ground with a wet thud. Woo! Congrats! That's your first kill. How do you feel? Celine joyfully celebrated nearby, having gained her first kill, moments before Moon did. Moon flashed a victorious smile. Feels good. What about you? Moon asked, pointing at the dead sheep before her. Really good. She grinned, revealing her snow-white teeth. A notification flashed before his eyes. You have gained. Share to your friends. Chapter 5, First Kill. Tip: you can use left, right keyboard keys to browse between chapters. Tap the middle of the screen to reveal reading options. If you find any errors, non-standard content, ads redirect, broken links, etc., please let us know so we can fix it as soon as possible. Report. Chapter 5, First Kill. You have killed a level 1 sheepbog. You have gained 5 lives. Staring at the notification flashing before his eyes, Moon felt satisfaction settle deep in his chest. He had gained the lives equivalent to 5 sheep. Things were looking promising already. What's up? Did the notification startle you? Celine appeared by his side, her voice carrying a knowing smile. Moon nodded. She laughed at his reaction. Same. Even though we're taught about the mysterious system before we even arrive, it's still different to experience it firsthand. I wonder how the system actually works. Celine didn't wait for Moon to answer before heading back to her area to hunt more sheep. The question had been rhetorical anyway. Nobody knew enough about the mysterious system and how it operated, let alone Moon, an orphan who'd only just entered the first sanctuary for the first time. Moon didn't dwell on her question. He turned his attention back to the enclosed area, scanning for another target. The more he could kill now, the more experience and lives he could accumulate. He needed to reach at least level 3 to feel safer about venturing outside the base walls with the team. Besides, fighting these beasts would give him practice using this class. The more familiar he became with the skills, the better his chances of comprehending them well enough to make them permanent. Hopefully, I can comprehend one of the 2 skills I mirrored from Celine's class, Moon thought as he approached another sheep. The affinity would be incredibly useful, although I doubt I'll be able to get it. It seems like a rare skill. It's not easy to comprehend. Even if he wanted to focus on the 4-element affinity, Moon didn't know where to start. How did you comprehend an affinity? Was it about understanding the nature of the elements themselves? The way mana interacted with them? He didn't have enough information yet. For now, he'd focus on what he could control. Killing beasts, gaining experience, lives, and mastering elemental attack through repetition. Another sheepdog noticed him and began its charge. Moon raised his hand, water already gathering in his palm. Moon raised his hand, then water coalesced in his palm, compressed and dense, before he launched it toward the approaching sheepdog. The creature bleated as the attack struck its shoulder, but didn't slow. These beasts were tougher than they looked, their thick hides absorbing more punishment than ordinary animals ever could. Moon sidestepped the charge. Although 12 points in agility weren't much objectively, it was enough to give him a very subtle edge against a level 1 creature that didn't specialize in speed. Moon formed another water ball and released it. This one caught the sheepdog in its flank as it turned to face him again. The beast staggered, its movements growing sluggish. Moon could see the toll the attacks were having. Dark, wet patches matted its sparse wool where the water had struck with force. Moon gathered mana for the 3rd strike, focusing on maintaining the compression Celine had mentioned. The water sphere formed perfectly in his palm, stable and ready. He took aim at the creature's head, where the previous strikes had left it most vulnerable. The sheepdog lowered its horns, preparing for another charge despite its injuries. Moon waited for it to commit, then released the water ball just as it began to move. Splash! The attack hit true, snapping the creature's head back. It stumbled, legs shaking, clearly on the verge of collapse. One more strike would finish it. Moon raised his hand again, mana already flowing. A furious bleat from his left startled him, different from the pained sounds of his target. This one was filled with rage. A sheepdog he hadn't accounted for charged from the side, its eyes fixed on Moon with malicious intent. This one was larger, with more developed horns. Moon was surprised by the aggression the sheepdog was displaying. He had never attacked it, which left him with one conclusion. It was most likely the mate of the sheepdog he was beating down or simply close to the one he had been beating down just moments prior. Either way, its intent to kill him was clear. Moon's heart jumped for a brief moment. He'd been so focused on his target that he hadn't noticed the second creature approaching until the last moment. The enraged sheepdog was already too close, its horns aimed directly at his stomach. He threw himself backwards, his body moving on instinct. The horns passed inches from his stomach, close enough that he felt the displaced air. Moon hit the ground hard, rolling to absorb the impact, scrambling to put distance between himself and the charging beast. The second sheepdog turned, hooves digging into the ground as it prepared for another charge. Moon's first target was still standing nearby, swaying but alive, presenting a potential second threat if he didn't act quickly. Moon made his decision in a fraction of a second. He decided to deal with the injured sheepdog first. If he could eliminate it immediately, he'd only have to deal with one opponent rather than 2. Moon pushed himself to his feet, ignoring the angry bellows of the second creature, and focused entirely on his original target. Water gathered in his palm before he released it. The water ball struck the wounded sheepdog directly in the face. The creature's legs finally gave out, collapsed completely, its breathing stopping within seconds. You have killed a level 1 sheepdog. You have gained 5 lives. Moon didn't pause to celebrate. The enraged sheepdog was already charging again, and this time he was ready for it. He sidestepped the charge more confidently now, creating distance as the creature thundered past. Conjure the water ball, create distance and repeat. That became his rhythm. The enraged sheepdog proved more resilient than the first, its fury seeming to fuel its endurance. But Moon remained calm and collected. Each strike weakened it further. Each dodge bought him time to prepare the next attack. The creature charged again, and Moon was ready. He launched another water ball, this one catching it mid-stride and disrupting its momentum. It stumbled, giving him the opening he needed. 3 more attacks followed in quick succession. The sheepdog's movements grew slower, more difficult. His bleats turned from rage to pain. Finally, after the 6th water ball found its mark, the creature collapsed. You have killed a level 1 sheepdog. You have gained 5 lives. Moon exhaled slowly, his hands trembling slightly from the adrenaline. That had been closer than he'd liked. One moment of inattention could have resulted in those horns finding their target. Then new text appeared, bright and satisfying. You have reached level 2. Strength, 10-11. Agility, 12-13. Constitution, 12-13. Mana, 15-16. Attribute points, 0. Moon felt the change immediately. His body felt lighter, stronger, and more responsive. The exhaustion from the consecutive fights faded slightly, replaced by renewed vigor. He'd crossed the first threshold. Share to your friends. Chapter 6. First class slot 1. Tip: you can use left, right keyboard keys to browse between chapters. Tap the middle of the screen to reveal reading options. If you find any errors, non-standard content, ads redirect, broken links, etc., please let us know so we can fix it as soon as possible. Report. Chapter 6. First class slot 1. Class: classless, elemental mage, limited time. Level: 2, 5%. Lives: 10. Strength: 11. Agility: 13. Constitution: 13. Mana: 16. Attribute points: 0. Skills: elemental attack, 4 element affinity. Talent: Grim Reaper. Class skill: class slot 1/1. Staring at his updated status, Moon felt genuine satisfaction wash over him. 10 lives already. His stats had increased across the board. But what really thrilled him was the sensation of growing stronger. The moment his level increased, he'd felt his body become more powerful. This feeling of progression, of measurable growth with each victory, was addictive in the best possible way. Moon finally understood why Awakeners spoke about the first sanctuary with such passion. It wasn't just about survival or resources. It was about this, the concrete proof that effort translates directly into power. He wanted more of it. Moon's eyes scanned the enclosed area. Several sheepdogs grazed nearby, unaware or unconcerned with the deaths of their companions. Their level 1 status made them perfect targets for grinding experience. He had limited time in this training ground. 2 hours total, and he'd already used a portion of that. He couldn't afford to wait for them to notice him. Moon approached the nearest sheepdog, water already gathering in his raised palm. The creature looked up from its grazing, eyes meeting his. Before it could react, before it could lower its horns or prepare to charge, Moon released his attack. The water ball struck it cleanly in the side. The sheepdog bleated in surprise and pain, immediately turning aggressive. But Moon was already moving, already forming his second attack. Moon maintained his rhythm. The sheepdog charged repeatedly, each attempt growing weaker as the accumulated damage took its toll. Its movements became predictable, desperate. The 4th water ball struck its head with a wet impact. The creature's legs buckled, and it collapsed onto its side, breathing once before going still. It died quicker this time. The attribute gains are not to scoff at. Moon thought, you have killed a level 1 sheepdog. You have gained 5 lives. The notification appeared, but this time it was accompanied by something new. Additional text materialized below the kill confirmation. Elemental attack. Rank: common. Proficiency: 5%. Details: You were able to conjure an elemental attack using mana and your affinity towards the element, plus 5% extra damage. Moon paused, reading the information carefully. His proficiency had increased by 5%. This resulted in an additional 5% extra damage. It wasn't massive, but it was noticeable. More importantly, it proved something crucial. Skills could grow stronger through repeated use. The more he practiced, the more he fought, the more powerful his abilities would become. And if skills could improve while he had them mirrored, what would happen if he managed to comprehend them fully and make them permanent? Would they retain their proficiency level? Would he have to start from scratch? Could he continue developing a skill indefinitely once it became truly his? These were questions for later. Right now, he needed to maximize every second of his remaining time in the training ground. Moon turned his attention to another sheepbog grazing about 10 meters away. Water was already gathering in his palm before he'd fully committed to the target. The process felt smoother now, the mana responded to his intent with less resistance, and the compression happened almost automatically. The skill improvement wasn't just numbers on a screen. He could feel the difference in how the mana flowed through the pathways his copied class provided. 15 lives total now. He was accumulating resources at 5 times the rate of normal awakeners, and none of them would ever know. This power, this anomaly that the system had granted him, was his secret. His advantage. The world had branded him a null. Those he knew had laughed at him, had abandoned him at his lowest point. He released the water ball. It shot forward with slightly more force than his previous attempts, the increased proficiency already evident. The attack struck the sheepbog squarely in the head, and the creature bellowed in pain and rage. Moon was already moving, preparing his next strike, settling into the rhythm that was becoming second nature. Once the 2 hours passed, the tokens they'd been given at the entrance began vibrating with increasing intensity. Workers stationed around the training grounds immediately called out for Moon's group to stop hunting. Your time is up. Start making your way out. Any additional attack from this point on will be counted as a breach of the contract, and you will be charged heavily. Moon and the others were escorted back through the facility, past the reinforced barriers and labeled sections, until they emerged into the main corridor of the base. Outside the training grounds, their group naturally gathered together to compare results. Level 3, Celine announced proudly, practically glowing with satisfaction. 75% toward level 4. How about everyone else? Level 3, 67%, John said, flexing his arms experimentally. The stat increases had clearly made a difference internally. Level 3, 65%, Alara added. All eyes turned to Moon. Level 3, 15%, he said simply. Alara looked at the Moon before asking, "Oh, you're a bit behind. Did something happen? Were the sheepbogs giving you trouble?" Moon shook his head. "No, nothing like that. Just took me a bit longer to get into the rhythm." Unlike him, Celine and the others had spent hours experimenting with their newly awakened abilities before the summoning. They'd come from families with resources, with knowledge about how to prepare. Moon had entered the first sanctuary with literally zero experience using any class because he thought he had none. Despite being behind them in level progression, Moon felt perfectly content with his results. What they didn't know, what they couldn't know, was that he had far more lives accumulated than any of them. 25 lives total now. Talents or classes that could increase or manipulate lives were simply unheard of. In all the documentation Moon had read, all the stories he'd heard, talents were known to be supportive at best. They were meant to offer small utility benefits. Hence, the reason classes were the true awakening of awakeners, not their talents. His talent was law-breaking by comparison, a 5 times multiplier on the fundamental resource of this world. Share to your friends. Chapter 7. First class slot. 2. Tip: you can use left, right keyboard keys to browse between chapters. Tap the middle of the screen to reveal reading options. If you find any errors, non-standard content, ads redirect, broken links, etc., please let us know so we can fix it as soon as possible. Report. Chapter 7. First class slot. 2. Even Celine, with her incredibly rare and powerful elemental mage class, wouldn't have a talent anywhere near this potent. Classes and talents operated on different scales. A person might have an exceptional class and a mediocre talent, or vice versa. The system distributed advantages unevenly. Moon had gotten extraordinarily lucky with his talent, even if his class situation was unconventional. After they finished sharing their experiences and discussing which skills had proven most effective, Celine's eyes lit up with fresh enthusiasm. Looking at each of them in turn, she said, "So, do you guys want to go on a real hunt now?" Outside the base, there was a moment of silence as the question settled between them. Going outside meant real danger. There were no safety barriers, no workers to intervene if things went wrong. Death became a genuine possibility rather than a distant concern. John nodded without hesitation. "I'm ready. That's why we're here. I currently have a few lives in stock, so it should be fine if we don't venture into any zones with a high penalty." Alara's agreement came just as quickly. "Same. The training grounds were useful, but we need actual combat experience." Moon met Celine's gaze and nodded as well. He had 25 lives, 3 levels, and a copied class that was growing stronger with every use. More importantly, staying safe meant staying weak. He couldn't afford weakness. Not with only $1,000 to his name and a future that depended entirely on what he could accomplish here. "Let's go," he said. Celine's grin widened, excitement radiating in heat waves from her body language. "Perfect. Let's gear up and head out. I saw some people selling basic equipment near the main gate. We should at least get some weapons and maybe a few healing supplies before we leave." The group began walking toward the base's commercial district, their footsteps echoing through the stone corridors. Moon walked with them, his mind already calculating how much money he would have left once he bought some equipment or if she bought some at all. In the first sanctuary, magical weapons from Earth were not allowed in and vice versa. The mechanism was special, since the sanctuary allowed humans to enter or leave with things like cash, clothes, etc. So even the heirs of the wealthiest needed to buy equipment from the first sanctuary itself. Moon walked with them, his mind already calculating how much money he would have left once he bought equipment, or if he should buy any at all. In the first sanctuary, magical weapons and equipment from Earth were not allowed through, and vice versa. The mechanism was peculiar and selective. The sanctuary allowed humans to enter and leave with things like cash, clothes, and personal items, but anything imbued with power or designed for combat was rejected by the portals. Even the heirs of the wealthiest families needed to purchase their equipment directly from the merchants of the first sanctuary itself. It was one of the few areas where everyone started on relatively equal footing. The commercial district near the main gate was bustling with activity. Stalls and small shops lined the stone corridors, their wares displayed prominently. Weapons, armor, potions, tools, all crafted within the sanctuary and priced in Earth currency that retained its value here. Just like everyone else, most of the Awakeners lived on Earth but mainly used the first sanctuary as a place to gather money for their family. The ability to move cash between both worlds allowed for Earth currency to retain its value. Of course, there were other currencies like beast cores, but this wasn't something that an orphan like Moon had his hands on. Beast cores were mainly used to create magical weapons. In their nature, these cores contain an abundance of energy that can be used to amplify or refine magical weapons. The others began browsing immediately, their purchases reflecting their preparation and resources. Alara, having already bought a bow before entering their team, skipped the weapon stalls entirely. She stopped at a Fletcher stand and purchased several bundles of arrows, inspecting the fletching and tips with an expert's eye before handing over the money. Celine moved through the district with a clear purpose, stopping at multiple vendors. She emerged with a mage's robe in deep blue, a wooden staff carved with flowing patterns, and several healing potions that glowed faintly in their glass vials. The total must have been substantial, but she paid without hesitation. John's purchases were the most considering he was a tank. He bought a full body armor that covered him from neck to shin, a large shield emblazoned with a simple design, and a one-handed sword with a straight, sharp blade. He looked every bit the tank his class suggested, ready to stand on the front line. Moon approached the armor stalls with considerably less confidence. He had $1,000 remaining, so every purchase mattered. He settled on the most basic option available: lightweight armor that consisted of reinforced leather covering his chest and shoulders. The armor had no helmet or greaves. It provided just enough protection to potentially save him from a glancing blow without restricting his movement. The cost was $500, leaving him with half the amount only. Lightweight armor. Rank: common. Details: a basic armor that provides minimal protection and offers high mobility to move in without restriction. Half his remaining money was gone in an instant, but it was necessary on multiple grounds. Going outside without any protection at all would be suicidal. He was fastening the straps when Celine approached, moving close enough that her voice wouldn't be heard by the others. "Do you need some money?" she whispered near his ear. "I can help you out if you want. You can pay me back later." The offer was delivered carefully, quietly, to avoid embarrassing him in front of John and Alara. It was a considerate gesture, a kind one at that, but Moon couldn't accept it. Accepting money meant creating a debt, a connection, a vulnerability. It meant appearing weak, dependent, and someone who needed charity. He'd already lost everything once by trusting the wrong person, by allowing himself to be in a position where others held power over him. He wouldn't make that mistake again. Moon shook his head, keeping his expression neutral. "No, it's all right. I've already bought some things before coming here. Thanks for the offer." Celine's face turned to one of understanding, then concern that she'd overstepped her boundaries. "Sorry if I offended you. I didn't mean to assume anything." "None taken," Moon replied evenly. Celine nodded, accepting his response without pushing further. She stepped back, giving him space, and rejoined John and Alara, who were comparing their new equipment. Moon adjusted the straps on his lightweight armor one final time, making sure it sat properly. The group finished their preparations and began moving toward the main gate, where the entrance to the wider sanctuary waited beyond the safety of the base walls. Share to your friends. Chapter 8. Buying equipment. Tip: you can use left, right keyboard keys to browse between chapters. Tap the middle of the screen to reveal reading options. If you find any errors, non-standard content, ads redirect, broken links, etc., please let us know so we can fix it as soon as possible. Report. Chapter 8. Buying equipment. Arriving at the gates, another group intercepted them before they could pass through. There were 5 of them, all looking noticeably more experienced than Moon's group. Their equipment showed signs of use, scuff marks on armor. They were obviously not part of the same batch that Moon and the others came in. A tall man with short-cropped hair stepped forward, his eyes scanning Moon's group. He wore medium armor and had a long sword strapped to his hip. He appeared to be in his late teens, 19 maybe. His gaze lingered on Celine. "Hey there. You four look like you're about to head out for the first time." Celine glanced at everyone for a moment. Seeing no response, she positioned herself as the de facto spokesperson. "We are indeed." "Thought so." The man gestured to his group behind him. "My name's Derek. We've been here for some time now and we cleared a few zones. Most of us are level 5. We're heading out to farm some level 2 and 3 beasts in the eastern woodlands. Generally, it's a safer area, good for newer groups to get their feet wet and all." One of Derek's companions, a woman with her hair tied back and a bow across her shoulders, added, "The thing is, we're short of a teammate. Our team member had to return to Earth for personal reasons. When we saw your group, we figured we'd ask if you wanted to join up. Strength in numbers, you know?" Derek nodded. "We'd split the loot fairly based on contribution. You'd get experience, safety, and we'd have more flexibility with a larger group. It's a win-win situation. What do you say?" Celine's expression remained polite. "That's generous of you to offer." "Not at all," Derek said with an easy smile. "Eastern woodlands are relatively safe, but things can still go wrong. An extra mage, a tank, an archer? That improves everyone's odds." His eyes moved across Moon's group again, cataloging their classes based on their equipment. "What do you say? Better than going out alone on your first run." The woman with the bow leaned in slightly. No pressure, but we're leaving in about 5 minutes. The good hunting spots get crowded if you wait too long. Celine glanced back at John, Elara, and Moon. Her expression was thoughtful, weighing the offer. The silence stretched for a moment as she considered. Can you give us a second to discuss? Celine asked. Sure, take your time, Derek said, stepping back slightly. We'll be right over there. His group moved a few meters away, giving them space but remaining within sight. Celine turned to face the others, her voice dropping low. What do you think? John crossed his arms, his brow furrowed slightly. I mean, they seem legitimate. Level 5 is only 2 levels above us. And they've been here a week, so they know the terrain better than we do. Elara's response was more measured. The eastern woodlands could be a good starting point, but why approach us specifically? There are other new groups here. Moon spoke up, his voice quiet but firm. It's convenient timing. They show up right as we're about to leave. They're missing exactly one role, and they know exactly where to take us. He looked at Derek's group, who were chatting among themselves. Doesn't it seem a bit too perfect? Celine tilted her head, considering his words. What are you thinking? That it's some kind of trap? I'm thinking we don't know them, we don't know their intentions. Yes, they're only level 5, but that's still an advantage if things go wrong. And we'd be following them to wherever they want to take us. John shook his head slightly. Moon, I get being cautious, but they're not that much stronger than us. If they wanted to do something, it wouldn't be worth the risk for them either. We're all awakeners here. It's not like they can just rob us without consequences. Besides, aren't we all in the same boat? We never knew each other before this, so you can apply the same principle to our gathering. Elara agreed with John and added her own. Besides, the eastern woodlands is a known area. Other groups hunt there too. It's not some isolated place where they could do whatever they wanted. She paused. And honestly, having experienced people guide us on our first outing isn't a bad thing. We could learn from watching them. Celine looked at Moon directly. I understand your concerns, but they have a point. The difference between level 3 and level 5 isn't massive. And if we're worried about safety, having more people actually helps us, not them. Moon remained silent for a moment. Everything they said made logical sense. The level gap wasn't insurmountable, the location was public and the reasoning was sound. But logic didn't erase the instinct telling him to be careful. Still, refusing outright would make him look paranoid. It would also create friction with his new group. He needed this group at least until he understood more about how the first sanctuary worked and how his own class worked. All right. John clapped his hands together once. All right then, let's do it. Elara simply nodded her agreement. Celine turned back toward Derek's group and walked over. Moon followed with the others, his eyes keeping track of where each member of Derek's group positioned themselves. We're in, Celine said. Derek's smile widened. Great choice. You won't regret it. Eastern woodlands have good spawns, and we'll make sure you get your share of the experience. He gestured toward the gate. Let's move out then. Stay close once we're outside. The path is safe, but no point taking chances. As they walked toward the massive gates that separated the base from the wilderness beyond, Moon stayed near the back of the group, his eyes moving constantly. Share to your friends. Chapter 9. Out on a hunt on. Tip: you can use left, right keyboard keys to browse between chapters. Tap the middle of the screen to reveal reading options. If you find any errors, non-standard content, ads redirect, broken links, etc., please let us know so we can fix it as soon as possible. Report. Chapter 9. Out on a hunt on. Moon and his group continued walking, passing through the massive gates. Beyond the walls, the world transformed. The orderly stone of the base gave way to a wilderness. Trees rose in the distance, and large rocks were seen every now and then. The atmosphere was different in the wilderness. With danger lurking in the shadows, it was difficult not to be on guard, especially as a newbie. Derek led from the front, his group interspersed with Moon's as they followed a path heading east. As they walked, the older awakeners began sharing their own stories. With a self-deprecating laugh, Derek began. You know, a week ago we thought we'd conquer this place, had it all figured out in our heads. We'd awaken, come here, hunt some monsters, get rich and powerful. Simple, right? One of his companions, a stocky man with a battle axe strapped to his back, shook his head ruefully. Then we actually left the base. The first beast we encountered was a level 3 razor wolf. The thing moved so fast we barely saw it coming. Nearly took Marcus's arm off before we managed to bring it down by using all of our strength. Everything's faster, stronger, more aggressive than you expect. Another member added, a thin man with twin daggers. The training grounds give you basics, but out here, the beasts actually want to kill you. They hunt in packs sometimes. They are very familiar with their terrain and use it for their own advantage. It's not like fighting sheep in a pen. Derek glanced back at Celine. Not trying to scare you, just want you to understand what you're walking into. Stay sharp, follow instructions, and you'll be fine. John seemed engaged, asking questions about their tank's tactics and how to position properly. Alara walked alongside the archer woman, discussing sight lines and arrow conservation. Celine chatted with Derek, her natural friendliness drawing out more details about the eastern woodlands. Moon stayed toward the back, silent. He noticed the girl with the bow, the one who'd spoken earlier about needing a healer, glance back at him. A moment later, she slowed her pace, letting the others pull ahead until she matched his stride at the rear of the group. She flashed Moon a soft smile before greeting him. Hey, I'm Iris, by the way. Don't think we properly introduced ourselves. Moon. That's quite the unique name. I like it. She adjusted the bow on her shoulder. So what class did you awaken? I'm guessing an assassin based on the light armor and no visible weapon. Mage, Moon said shortly. Oh nice. Ranged damage, good control potential. Iris smiled. We could probably coordinate well. I usually open with arrows to draw aggro. Then mages follow up while the target's focused on me or the tank. You ever think about tactics like that? Not really. The shortness of his answer didn't deter her. What made you decide to come out so quickly? I mean, most people spend at least a day in the base, getting oriented. Seemed like the logical thing to do. Iris laughed lightly. Fair enough. Not much point sitting around when you could be getting stronger, right? She paused, then asked, what are you hoping to accomplish here? Like long term, do you want to join a guild eventually? Go independent? Make a name for yourself by reaching the second sanctuary? Haven't decided yet. Moon kept his eyes on the path ahead, on the positioning of Derek's group, on the treeline that was growing closer with each step. Iris studied him for a moment, her smile fading slightly. You're not much of a talker, huh? Not particularly. That's fine, she said, though her tone suggested she was reconsidering her approach. Just thought it'd be good to get to know each other since we're hunting together. Communication helps when things get dangerous. Moon finally looked at her directly. I'll communicate when it matters. Iris held his gaze for a second, then nodded slowly. All right, fair enough. She didn't speed up to rejoin the others, but she stopped asking questions, the conversation dying into silence. Moon was fine with that. He didn't need to make friends, nor did he need to share his story or his ambitions, especially with a member of a group he had just met moments earlier. The treeline grew closer. Derek raised his hand, signaling for the group to slow down. The eastern woodland is just ahead. From here on, stay alert. Keep noise to a minimum. We're entering the hunting territory. A few moments later, the group was officially within the eastern woodlands, one of the many areas that newer awakeners used to grow stronger. Sounds of combat echoed through the surrounding forest. The clash of steel against hide, the crackle of elemental magic, shouted warnings and coordinated calls. It was a popular hunting spot, with multiple groups spread throughout the territory, each carving out its own patch of wilderness to farm. Moon could hear them from afar but rarely saw them. The trees were thick enough to provide natural barriers between groups, offering the illusion of isolation. Everyone here had the same goal: survive their encounters and grow stronger. Kill before being killed. This was the natural law of the first sanctuary, the fundamental truth that governed existence in this world. Defeat others and grow stronger, or be defeated and lose everything. The path Derek led them down was well-worn, packed dirt marked by countless footsteps. Branches overhead filtered the light from the two moons, casting everything in an otherworldly glow. At the front of the group, one of the members of Derek's team, the scout, raised his hand. Seeing the signal, Derek immediately made the group halt at once. "Razor Wolf pack ahead," he whispered, pointing through a gap in the trees. 3 of them, level 4, standard formation, tanks up front, ranged in back. Iris and... He glanced at Celine. "What was your name again?" "Celine. Celine, you two focus fire on the one I mark. John, you're with Marcus on the front line. Split their attention. Everyone else, watch for strays and be ready to adapt." Derek's eyes finally landed on Moon, as if only just remembering he was there. "You too. Just be careful not to die. Share to your friends." Chapter 10. Out on a Hunt 2. Tip: you can use left, right keyboard keys to browse between chapters. Tap the middle of the screen to reveal reading options. If you find any errors, non-standard content, ads redirect, broken links, etc., please let us know so we can fix it as soon as possible. Report. Chapter 10. Out on a Hunt 2. The group began moving into position to tackle the incoming group of wolves. Through the trees, Moon could make out the shapes Derek had indicated. 3 wolf-like creatures, larger than any natural wolf from the old times, with fur that can withstand swords. Their fangs were visible even from this distance, elongated and sharp, exactly as their name suggested. They were feeding on something, tearing into a carcass with focused intensity. Derek raised his hand, preparing to give the signal. Moon positioned himself near Celine, his mind already running through various scenarios. 3 level 4 beasts. The math favored them heavily, but numbers meant nothing if coordination failed or if someone panicked. His hand moved through the motion of gathering mana, preparing to form a water ball the moment combat began. Derek's hand dropped. Now! The whole team moved in coordination with the command. The 3 wolves darted between trees the moment they detected the group, using the thick trunks as natural barriers to close the distance while minimizing their exposure. The wolves were smart. They didn't lunge blindly at Moon's team in a suicidal charge. Rather, they were sly and calculated. Derek reacted immediately, his sword already drawn. Marcus, intercept left. John, support center. The main tank, Marcus, moved with no fear. He slammed his shield into the ground, and a translucent barrier of energy expanded outward, cutting off the leftmost wolf's approach. The creature snarled, forced to redirect. John rushed forward to support, positioning himself slightly behind Marcus. His role became immediately clear. He wasn't the primary tank but a secondary line of defense, ready to catch anything that slipped past or to reinforce where needed. "Iris, focus fire on the center one," Derek shouted, his sword flashing as he engaged the rightmost wolf that had broken through. Iris drew her bowstring back in one fluid motion. She released it, and the arrow struck the center wolf mid-stride, punching through its shoulder. The creature yelped but didn't slow its approach. Celine raised her new staff, mana gathering at its tip. A spear of compressed water formed and launched forward, following Iris's arrow. It struck the same wolf in its flank, the impact causing it to stumble. Moon positioned himself slightly to Celine's left, his angle giving him a clear line of sight to the wolves while keeping his back away from the older group's members. His eyes moved constantly, tracking the wolves, monitoring Derek's team positions, and noting exit routes through the trees. He formed a water ball and released it toward the center wolf, adding his damage to Celine and Iris's barrage. The attack struck true, crashing against the creature's head just as it tried to recover from the previous hits. The wolves were strong. They moved with frightening speed and coordination, their fur seeming to deflect some of the damage from glancing blows. But Derek's team was experienced. Marcus held the left wolf's attention, his shield absorbing vicious bites and claw strikes. Derek danced around the right wolf, his sword finding gaps in its defense. The thin man with twin daggers appeared from the wolf's blind spot, his blades flashing across its hind leg. The center wolf, taking the concentrated fire from 3 ranged attackers, began to falter. Another arrow from Iris, another water spear from Celine, another water ball from the moon. The creature's legs buckled. Derek's stocky companion with the battle axe rushed in, bringing his weapon down in a devastating overhead strike that crushed the wolf's skull. You have killed a level 4 razor wolf. You have gained 10 lives. The notification appeared in Moon's vision. A soft smile formed on his face. To gain so many lives whilst in a group was truly a great benefit. Rewards such as experience or lives were distributed by the system based on contribution. Compared to the others, he had the lowest contribution. Yet he might have gotten the highest lives whilst making the lowest contribution, all due to his talent. With the center wolf down, the fight shifted rapidly. Iris and Celine redirected their attacks to support Marcus. The left wolf, now taking damage from multiple sources, while still being locked down by Marcus's defensive skills, lasted less than 10 seconds. Derek finished his opponent with a thrust through its throat. Whoosh! The entire fight had taken maybe 2 minutes. Derek straightened, wiping his blade on the wolf's fur. Good work, everyone. That's how it's done. Moon's eyes continued scanning the surroundings even as the others began to relax. Throughout the entire fight, he'd maintained awareness of every person's position. He'd noted how the older group moved, how they communicated with subtle gestures and timing. And he'd made certain that he never gave his back to any of them. Never put himself in a position where someone could strike without him seeing it coming. The wolves were dead, but Moon's vigilance wasn't. Derek sheathed his sword and turned to Moon's group with an approving nod. Not bad at all for your first real fight. Celine, your timing was excellent. Those attacks hit exactly when they needed to. He looked at John. And you, solid positioning. Knew when to hold back and when to support. That's good instinct for a tank. His eyes moved to Alara. Your accuracy is impressive. Every arrow counted. Then his gaze swept past Moon as if he wasn't there, moving on to address the group as a whole. You all did well. Keep that up and you'll survive out here just fine. Moon noticed the deliberate omission but showed nothing on his face. Celine, still catching her breath from the fight, asked, How many lives do you lose if you die in the eastern woodlands? Derek's expression grew more serious. Depends on the area. Where we are right now, 2 lives per death. It's one of the safer zones, relatively speaking. He gestured vaguely toward the deeper parts of the forest. Venture further in where the level 5 and 6 beasts spawn, you're looking at 4 or 5 lives lost. I heard from older awakeners that there are areas in these woodlands where death costs 10 lives or more. 10? John's eyes widened slightly. Or more, Derek confirmed. The deeper you go, the higher the stakes. That's why we stick to areas we can handle. No point getting greedy and losing everything. Moon absorbed this information silently, already running calculations. He pulled up his status, the translucent panel appearing before his eyes where only he could see it. Name Moon. Race, human. Class, classless, elemental mage, limited time. Level, 3, 25%. Lives, 45. Strength, 12. Agility, 14. Constitution, 14. Mana, 17. Attribute points, 0. Skills, elemental attack, 4 element affinity. Talent, Grim Reaper. Class skill, class slot, 1/1, 45 lives. In this area, where death cost 2 lives, he could die 22 times before being permanently gone. 22 chances. Meanwhile, others in his group, Celine included, probably had around 10 lives at most. Maybe 12 if they'd been particularly efficient in the training grounds. For them, 5 deaths would mean complete erasure. For Moon, 5 deaths would barely make a dent in his reserves. The disparity was staggering, and it gave him a safety net that no one else possessed. He could take risks others couldn't afford. could push further, fight harder, make mistakes and learn from them without the same fear of permanent consequences. But he'd never let anyone know that. The moment people understood how many lives he had, questions would follow. How did you accumulate so many? What's your secret? Can you share it? This was his advantage, and it would remain hidden. 2 lives doesn't sound too bad, John said, though his voice carried uncertainty. It's not, compared to other areas, Derek agreed. But losing even 2 lives hurts. That's resources you could have used for enhancement, trading, other opportunities. Death is never cheap, even in the safer zones. Iris was already moving toward the wolf corpses, pulling out a knife. Might as well harvest what we can. Razor wolf pelts sell decently in the base. The group began the post-battle routine of harvesting materials, their conversation turning to what they do with their earnings. Moon stayed at the periphery, his eyes still scanning the treeline, his awareness still tracking every member of both groups. Share to your friends. Chapter 11, Wolf Pack. Tip: you can use left, right keyboard keys to browse between chapters. Tap the middle of the screen to reveal reading options. If you find any errors, non-standard content, ads redirect, broken links, etc., please let us know so we can fix it as soon as possible. Report. Chapter 11, Wolf Pack. As they continued deeper into the eastern woodlands, the sounds of combat grew more distant. The path narrowed, forcing the group into a tighter formation. Then, through the trees ahead, another group appeared, moving in the opposite direction, heading back toward the base. Derek stopped immediately, his entire being changing. His confidence evaporated, and he appeared tense. Marcus and the others in his group straightened, their eyes dropping to avoid direct contact. The approaching group was impossible to miss. There were 5 awakeners, all radiating a powerful aura. Their equipment was immaculate, clearly high-grade gear that must have cost a fortune. But it was the man in the center who drew the eye. Red hair, vivid as fresh blood, fell to his shoulders. He wore long robes that matched his hair. His expression was utterly aloof, his gaze fixed straight ahead, not even acknowledging that Derek's group or Moon's group existed. Whether it was arrogance or not wasn't clear. But one thing was clear, their group didn't entice him or make him feel threatened in any way, as if they were too low to acknowledge. His 4 companions moved around him, clearly accustomed to their roles. A shield-bearer walked slightly ahead. 2 damage dealers flanked the sides. A support class brought up the rear. All of them looked formidable, but none of them carried the same presence as the red-haired man. Derek and his group pressed to the side of the path, making room. None of them made eye contact. John and Alara seemed confused by the reaction but followed suit instinctively. Celine's expression only showed curiosity, whilst Moon's was unreadable. The group passed without slowing, without speaking, without acknowledging anyone's existence. The red-haired man's eyes never moved from the path ahead, as if Derek's group and Moon's group were simply part of the landscape. His footsteps were silent despite his boots. The air around him felt warmer, charged with something that made Moon's skin prickle. Then they were gone, disappearing into the forest behind them, heading back toward the base with whatever spoils they'd claimed from the deeper territories. Derek released a breath he'd been holding. The tension in his shoulders eased slightly, though he still looked unsettled. Who were they? Celine asked quietly. Derek waited another few seconds, as if making sure the group was truly out of earshot, before answering. Those were the Midnight Hunters. They entered the sanctuary at the same time as us, part of the same summoning batch. Same time as you? John's eyebrows rose. But they looked like they're on a completely different level? Derek finished. Because they are. They've already reached level 10. They're hunting in the deep forest areas where the beasts are level 10, 11, maybe higher. Places where we wouldn't last a minute. Marcus shook his head with something like awe. A week. They've been here the same amount of time as us and they're level 10. We're barely level 5. Did you see the one with the red hair? Derek continued, his voice dropping further. That's Kale Glassy, the sole inheritor of the Glassy group. John's eyes widened. The glassy group? The same? The same one, Derek confirmed. His father is one of the most powerful businessmen in the Second Sanctuary. Controls multiple bases, has trade routes across half the known territories, holds resources most people can't even imagine. Iris added, word is he's powering through the levels like they're nothing. At this rate, he'll reach the Second Sanctuary in a few years, maybe less if he has a good run. Most Awakeners take a decade or more to make that transition. And his class? Celine asked. Derek glanced back in the direction Kale had gone, as if worried the man might somehow hear them. Nobody knows exactly what it is, but the gossip says it's something incredibly powerful related to fire. But who knows? Derek shrugged. Moon turned slowly, looking back down the path where Kale's group had disappeared. The red-haired man's back was just barely visible through the trees, moving with that same unhurried confidence, never looking back, never acknowledging the world behind him. Something about that absolute disregard stirred something cold in Moon's chest. He wanted to be like that, to walk without worrying about the people behind him. That was what real power looked like. The kind that made others step aside without a word. The kind that existed on a completely different plane from people like Sarah or Marcus. At level 3 with a copied class that would expire in less than 20 hours. The gap between him and someone like Kale Glassy was incomprehensible. But gaps could be closed. Power could be gained. Lives could be accumulated. Moon turned back to face forward, his expression unchanged. Let's keep moving, Derek said, breaking the moment. We've still got hunting to do. The group continued hunting, moving through the eastern woodlands. Beast after beast fell to their attacks. Razor wolves, horned boars with tusks like spears, and even a lone serpent creature that had dropped from the trees before Iris put 3 arrows through its skull. Derek's team maintained their leadership, calling out targets, managing aggro, and ensuring everyone got their share of the kills. Moon's group followed their lead, gradually finding their own rhythm within the larger formation. After 2 hours of looking for targets and engaging in combat, the notifications came. You have reached level 4. Celine let out a delighted laugh, her fatigue momentarily forgotten. Level 4. Finally. John grinned, flexing his arms as the stat increases took effect. Same here. I can feel the difference already. Ilara simply nodded, though her satisfied expression spoke volumes. Level 4. Not bad for our first real outing. All 3 of them had crossed the threshold, their experience bars filling from the combination of training ground kills and hours of hunting actual threats. Derek's guidance had kept them in areas with appropriate level beasts, maximizing their growth without pushing into genuinely dangerous territory. Moon remained silent, checking his own status. Name Moon. Race, human. Class, classless, elemental mage. Limited time. Level 3, 92%. Lives 75. Strength 12. Agility 14. Constitution 14. Mana 17. Attribute points 0. Skills: Elemental Attack 4. Element Affinity. Talent: Grim Reaper. Class skill: Class slot 1/1. Moon was tantalizingly close to level 4, but not quite there. He'd contributed to every fight, landed his attacks consistently, but remained just shy of the threshold his teammates had crossed because of his previous setback. More importantly, though, were his lives. 75. While the others had likely gained somewhere between 10 and 20 lives total from all their kills combined, Moon had accumulated 75. Every beast that fell added 5 times the normal amount to his reserves. With 2 lives lost per death in this area, he could now die 37 times before permanent erasure. 37 chances. The number was absurd, excessive, the kind of safety net that would fundamentally change how someone approached risk. But Moon kept his expression neutral, showing nothing of the calculations running through his mind. Derek noticed their level-ups and nodded approvingly. Congratulations. Level 4 is a good milestone. You're officially past the complete beginner stage. He glanced at Moon. You'll hit it soon enough. Probably 1 or 2 more kills. Moon nodded. Probably. We should think about heading back soon, Marcus said, looking at the position of the two moons. We've been out here for hours. Don't want to push our luck. Derek considered this, then looked at Moon's group. What do you think? Want to hunt a bit more? Or call it here? Celine glanced at Moon, John, and Alara. I'm good to keep going if everyone else is. We're all doing well. John nodded his agreement. Alara simply said, I can continue. All eyes turned to Moon. He was 8% away from level 4. One good fight would push him over. And more importantly, every additional beast meant 5 more lives added to his growing reserves. I can keep going, Moon said. Derek smiled. All right then, let's find you one more good fight to cap off the day. Then we head back, sell our materials and split the profits. Sound good. The group murmured their agreement and continued deeper into the eastern woodlands. Share to your friends. Chapter 12. Hunting deeper in the eastern woodlands. Tip: you can use left, right keyboard keys to browse between chapters. Tap the middle of the screen to reveal reading options. If you find any errors, non-standard content, ads redirect, broken links, etc., please let us know so we can fix it as soon as possible. Report. Chapter 12. Hunting deeper in the eastern woodlands. As they walked deeper into the zone, a notification suddenly materialized before Moon's eyes. You've entered a zone where death is punished by 5 lives. Everyone received the same notification, and their reaction was apparent. Their expressions turned grim, and their movements became more cautious. Derek noticed the change in atmosphere and quickly raised his hand. It's okay, everyone. Don't panic. We're at the edge of this zone. The monsters here won't be as powerful as the ones deeper in. We'll just get one good kill, then head straight back. Simple. His words carried weak reassurance, but the group nodded, accepting his command. They had little choice. They'd come this far already. The risk had doubled from 2 lives to 5. The rewards remained unclear. Everyone, tighten the formation, Derek ordered, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper. Stay close and maintain your positions. We're looking for a single target. Something isolated we can take down quickly without alerting other monsters in the area. The group compressed, weapons ready, eyes scanning the forest. They moved like this for several minutes, careful to avoid alerting any beasts to their presence, hunting for prey while simultaneously trying not to become prey themselves. Then something strange occurred. A small circle of energy appeared in space, circular and spinning. It formed directly in their path. Light poured from within it. It was disorienting and impossible to look away from. What the... Derek started. The portal expanded with terrifying speed. Before anyone could react, before anyone could retreat or brace themselves, an overwhelming force seized them all. Moon felt his body yanked forward as if caught by an invisible hand. His feet left the ground, and the world blurred as he was sucked into the mysterious force. Screams erupted from the group, but they were cut short as they were pulled through. Moon's vision went white, then dark, then flooded with color he had no names for. After a short while, the sensation stopped. Thud! Moon hit solid ground, stumbling forward before catching himself. The others materialized around him in similar states of disarray, some falling to their knees, others barely staying upright. The eastern woodlands were gone. They stood on a mountain, surrounded by ice and snow in every direction. The temperature hit Moon instantly, and the cold was so intense it threatened to burn his exposed skin. Wind howled across the barren landscape, carrying stinging particles of ice that felt like needles against his face. The mountains stretched endlessly in all directions, peaks rising into a sky that showed neither the familiar 2 moons nor stars, just a swirling vortex of pale blue and white that seemed to pulse with its own frigid light. Snow piled in massive drifts, some taller than a person. The snow beneath their feet was treacherous and unforgiving. Their breath came out in visible clouds, freezing almost instantly in the brutal air. You have entered a hidden realm. 30 lives will be lost per death. The words hung in Moon's vision like a death sentence. 30 lives per death. Around him, faces drained of what little color the cold hadn't already stolen. Alara's hand went to her mouth, her entire body already shaking from the temperature. John's earlier confidence evaporated entirely as he wrapped his arms around himself. Celine's lips were already turning blue, her gear offering almost no protection against the elements. Even Derek's team, the experienced ones who'd been guiding them, looked shaken to their core. Marcus's shield wouldn't help against this cold. Iris's bow was already stiffening in her grip. Shit! Derek's voice came out hoarse, his breath creating clouds of frost. We were pulled into a hidden realm. He swallowed hard, his entire body tensing against the cold that was already seeping through their clothes. Moon understood immediately why the reaction was so severe. Hidden realms were legendary among awakeners. Places that existed outside normal space, pocket dimensions that offered incredible rewards to those who could clear them. Powerful artifacts, rare materials, massive amounts of lives and experience. But the danger matched or exceeded the rewards. Hidden realms were designed for experienced awakeners, people at level 10, 15, 20 or higher. The monsters inside were proportionally stronger. The death penalties proportionally harsher. For new awakeners like them, barely scraping level 4 and 5, their chances of returning alive were effectively zero. Moon pulled up his status, his fingers already numb from the cold. 75 lives. With 30 lives lost per death, he could die twice before permanent erasure. Just twice. Around him, the situation was even more dire. Celine probably had around 20 lives. One death would leave her with nothing, unable to resurrect if she died. John and Alara were in similar positions. Derek's group had more experience, maybe 30 lives accumulated over their week of hunting. But that meant one death would drain them completely. A second death would be the end if they were lucky to resurrect from the first one. Grinding his teeth, Derek said, "Everyone stay calm, Hidden Realms. They have exit conditions. We only need to complete the objective, then leave. We just need to figure out what the condition is." Okay. Although he appeared confident, Moon could feel fear in his tone. "And if we can't complete it?" Marcus asked, his voice barely audible over the howling wind. Derek didn't answer, but merely gave him a grim look. If they couldn't complete the Hidden Realms objective, they would die here. All of them, if not from monsters, then from exposure to this merciless cold. Moon's eyes scanned their surroundings, looking for anything that could help them in this dire situation. What his eyes landed on was endless snow, treacherous ice beneath their feet, and a brutal wind that seemed determined to freeze them solid. The peaks rising in the distance, impossibly tall, their summits lost in the swirling white sky. And in that distance something moved. It was a dark dot against the white landscape, making its way through the snow. Moon's legs moved instinctively, and he took a step back. "Do you guys see that?" Moon muttered, looking at the figure that approached them. Everyone turned to look at the area where the Moon's eyes were stuck, and the results shocked them all. This. Share to your friends. Chapter 13. A Hidden Surprise. Tip: you can use left, right keyboard keys to browse between chapters. Tap the middle of the screen to reveal reading options. If you find any errors, non-standard content, ads redirect, broken links, etc., please let us know so we can fix it as soon as possible. Report. Chapter 13. A Hidden Surprise. It's a human? Ow. Were they also pulled in? John said, staring at the figure approaching them in disbelief. The figure wore haggard bare leather clothes, patched and worn from extended use. Thick fur lined the collar and sleeves, offering protection against the brutal cold that was already making Moon's group shiver violently. A spear rested in the figure's arms, its tip stained dark with what could only be blood. His aura was overwhelming, appearing to be a powerful awakener, stronger than everyone present. The group immediately moved into defensive positions. They weren't sure about the intentions of whoever was approaching, and in a place like this, trust was a luxury they couldn't afford. "Stay on guard, he is at least level 10, Derek whispered, his hand moving to his sword hilt. The figure continued forward, unbothered by the wind and snow. When they were about 20 meters away, close enough to be heard over the howling wind but far enough to avoid immediate threat, the figure stopped. It was a man, his face weathered and hard, with a thick beard crusted with ice. His eyes were sharp, assessing them with the same caution they showed him. "You're new arrivals," the man said. Derek stepped forward slightly, positioning himself as the spokesperson. "What are you?" The man didn't seem to mind the way the question was phrased. "Name's Gareth. I'm an awakener, same as you. Got pulled into this cursed place months ago through a random rift while hunting. Before you ask, I'm not the only one. There are others, too. We've managed to survive. Barely. Months? You've been trapped here for months." Gareth's expression darkened. "Trapped is right. This hidden realm doesn't let you leave easily. Most of us are still trying to figure out the exit conditions." He gestured vaguely behind him. "I was out hunting for supplies when I spotted you lot. Lucky for you. Most people who get dropped here freeze to death within hours if they don't find shelter." "Where are the others?" Derek asked, his tone cautious but interested. "We've got a camp. A cave system about 2 kilometers northwest with fire, shelter, and some food stores. It's not much, but it keeps us alive. You can follow me back if you want. Or you can stay here and take your chances with the cold." Alara stepped forward, her bow still in hand. "Why should we follow you? How do we know this isn't a trap?" Gareth stared at her for a long moment, then let out a harsh laugh that turned into visible clouds of frost. "A trap? Girl, look around you. This whole place is a trap. I don't need to lure you anywhere to kill you. The mountain will do that just fine." He turned around, already starting to walk away. "If you have a death wish and want to become frozen ice, then feel free to remain here. I'm going back. Whoever wants to follow me may do so." He didn't wait for a response, his footsteps crunching through the snow as he began retracing his path. The group exchanged glances, the wind howling around them, the cold seeping deeper into their bones with every passing second. Derek was the first to speak. "He's right. We won't last out here exposed. If there's a group of survivors who've created a safe haven, somewhere we can get out of this cold and figure out our next move, that's our best option. We got lucky meeting him this early." Marcus nodded, already shivering badly. "Better than freezing to death standing here." Celine looked at Moon, John, and Alara, her eyes asking the silent question. Moon considered for a moment. Gareth could be leading them into danger. But Gareth was also right, staying here guaranteed death from exposure. "We should go. We can figure out what we can do after we gain some information or understand where we are exactly," Moon said quietly. John and Alara nodded their agreement. "All right," Celine said, raising her voice slightly. "We're coming with you." Gareth didn't turn around or acknowledge them, just kept walking through the snow with the confidence of someone who knew the terrain. Derek's group began following immediately, and Moon's group fell in behind them. Separating now would be suicidal. Whatever dangers waited ahead, they'd face them together. Moon pulled his inadequate armor tighter against the wind and followed Gareth's footsteps through the snow, his eyes constantly scanning their surroundings, his mind already calculating how many more surprises this hidden realm might have waiting for them. The cold bit deeper with every step, and the mountain offered no mercy. Along the way, they encountered a large Arctic boar with 3 horns on its head. Its eyes glinted with malicious intent, and before the team could react, it darted towards them. Arctic boar, level 12, details. With 3 powerful horns that could penetrate most defenses and a natural affinity to cold weathers. The Arctic boar is a predator in the region, feared by most. "Careful, it's really strong," Derek shouted with a grim expression as he got into a stance. Before the team could move, Gareth had already thrust his spear into the Arctic boar's throat. Wet gurgles was all that could be heard, as everyone watched in shock. At that moment, everyone present realized that Gareth was much stronger than they thought. They arrived at the cave after following Gareth for about 15 minutes through the relentless snow. The entrance was partially concealed by an overhang of ice and rock, natural camouflage that would make it nearly impossible to spot unless you knew exactly where to look. As they approached, Moon felt the question nagging at him. 15 minutes in this brutal cold, 20 meters of visibility at best through the blizzard, treacherous footing on the ice. Why would anyone venture so far from shelter? By the way, Moon called out, raising his voice to be heard over the wind. What are the beasts around this area? Gareth glanced back briefly, his expression unreadable behind his ice-crusted beard. Snow bears, mostly. They are territorial, but their meat keeps well in the cold. Good source of food. He gestured vaguely at the white landscape around them. Then there are the ice wraiths. They are much harder to kill, and not worth eating when other options exist. But their cores sell for good value if we ever get out of here. And deeper in, he paused. Deeper in there are things we avoid. Frost giants and worse. And you were out here hunting alone? Moon pressed. Someone has to, Gareth replied flatly. We take turns. Can't survive on stored supplies forever. He stopped at the cave entrance, turning to face the group fully for the first time. The bears don't usually come within a kilometer of the cave. They're smart enough to avoid areas with too much human activity. So yes, I go out far. We all do. His tone suggested the conversation was over. He ducked into the cave entrance, disappearing into the darkness beyond. Moon filed the information away. The explanation made sense, but something about it still felt off. He couldn't place exactly what, just an instinct whispering that not everything added up. Derek moved toward the entrance, already eager to escape the cold. Come on, let's get inside before we lose our fingers to frostbite. The group followed, one by one, stepping from the brutal wind and snow into the relative shelter of the cave. Share to your friends. Chapter 14, Gareth. Tip: you can use left, right keyboard keys to browse between chapters. Tap the middle of the screen to reveal reading options. If you find any errors, non-standard content, ads redirect, broken links, etc., please let us know so we can fix it as soon as possible. Report. Chapter 14, Gareth. Inside the cave, it smelled foul, coming from the mixture of unwashed bodies, old blood, and stale air that hit everyone's nostrils like a wall. Gareth noticed their reactions and spoke without looking back. You'll have to get used to the smell. We've been wearing the same clothes for weeks. Can't wash them, can't change them. Get them wet in this cold and you're dead within hours. Moon and the others said nothing, though he could see Celine covering her nose discreetly. It was a practical reality of their situation, and complaining wouldn't change it. The cave itself was decently sized, extending back into darkness with a few torches providing illumination. Animal pelts were piled in corners, makeshift bedding. A small fire burned in a carved-out pit, its smoke somehow venting through cracks in the ceiling. Crude weapons leaned against walls. Dried meat hung from hooks driven into the stone. But unlike the large base that Gareth had implied, there was nobody inside except two people. They sat near the fire, both wrapped in layers of fur. One was a woman with hollow eyes and pale skin. The other was a younger man, his leg wrapped in bloodied bandages. Neither looked up when the group entered, too exhausted or too ill to care. Is that everyone here? Moon asked, his eyes scanning the cave's interior. Gareth shook his head. No, that's not everyone. But we all have our own duties. These two are in the cave because they're unwell. The others are out doing various things, scouting, hunting, gathering firewood, checking traps. You'll meet them later tonight. That's when everyone arrives back. Everyone nodded, understanding Gareth's words. You couldn't remain passive in a place like this. To survive, you needed to be constantly working, constantly contributing. Sitting idle meant death, either from starvation or from letting your guard down when a beast decided to attack. Still, Moon's eyes returned to the two injured people near the fire. The woman's hollow expression, the man's bandaged leg, the blood seeping through despite the wrapping. How many others had Gareth mentioned? How many people were actually part of this survivor group? And more importantly, what had injured these two badly enough that they couldn't even stand? Moon kept the questions to himself for now, but his awareness remained sharp, cataloging every detail of the cave and every potential exit. Derek moved closer to the fire, already extending his hands toward the warmth. "Thank you for bringing us here. We'd have frozen out there." Gareth grunted, neither accepting nor rejecting the gratitude. "You can rest by the fire. Warm up, but when night comes, you'll need to contribute. Everyone works. No exceptions." His tone left no room for argument. Derek and the others exchanged uncertain glances. How could they possibly contribute when night came? Were they expected to go out hunting in the dark, in temperatures even more brutal than what they'd already experienced? Guard duty? Something else entirely? None of them dared ask. The timing didn't seem appropriate, nor were the circumstances. Moon positioned himself near the cave entrance, close enough to the fire to benefit from its warmth, but far enough that he could see both the interior of the cave and the exit. The spot gave him visibility of everyone present while keeping his back to solid stone rather than open space. He'd also chosen the location partly because Celine had decided to sit there. She'd moved to the periphery rather than crowding around the fire with Derek's group, settling onto a relatively flat piece of rock with her staff resting across her lap. Out of everyone present, in Moon's opinion, Celine was the most mysterious. Her class was exceptional, rare enough that the most powerful guilds would have fought over her. Yet she'd formed a party with random awakeners rather than leveraging that advantage immediately. She'd offered him money without being asked, shown concern, but something in her eyes suggested she was always observing, just like he was. She noticed him settling nearby and gave a small, tired smile. "Cold enough for you? Could be worse," Moon replied, though his fingers were still numb despite being inside the cave. Celine pulled her knees up, wrapping her arms around them. In a quiet voice, she whispered low enough that the others by the fire wouldn't hear. "Months. Can you imagine being trapped here for so long? I don't know if I'd last a week in this conditions." Moon watched Gareth move deeper into the cave, checking on the two injured survivors. "He's lasted. The others have too, apparently. I wonder how many others there actually are," Celine murmured, echoing Moon's own thoughts. "And what happened to the ones who didn't make it?" It was the kind of observation that confirmed Moon's assessment. She wasn't just friendly and optimistic. She was paying attention, questioning, and analyzing the situation just like he was. "We'll find out soon enough," Moon said. Celine nodded, her gaze drifting to the cave entrance where wind howled and snow continued to fall. Assuming tonight doesn't bring its own problems, Celine thought internally. They sat in companionable silence after that, both warming themselves by the fire while remaining alert, both keeping their thoughts private while clearly thinking along similar lines. Near the center of the cave, Derek was already trying to strike up a conversation with the injured woman, asking about the Hidden Realms layout, what they'd learned. She responded in monosyllables, her hollow eyes barely focusing on him. John and Alara huddled close to the fire, their earlier enthusiasm completely drained by the cold. And Gareth stood in the shadows near the back of the cave, his expression unreadable, watching them all with the patience of someone who'd seen this scene play out before. Time passed by in an excruciatingly slow manner. Minutes felt like hours and hours felt like days. The fire crackled nearby, and the wind howled outside. The two injured survivors remained motionless near the flames. Gareth occasionally moved through the cave, checking supplies, adjusting pelts, but offering nothing in terms of information or assistance. After a few hours had passed with no sign of the other survivors returning, no food being offered, and no explanation of what they'd be doing when night came, Moon decided to explore. He'd waited to see if anything would happen, but it seemed like Gareth had no intentions of providing anything beneficial beyond basic shelter. Moon stood up slowly, stretching as if his muscles were simply stiff from sitting. "Hey, you, where are you going? Share to your friends." Chapter 15. Questions and Answers. Tip: you can use left, right keyboard keys to browse between chapters. Tap the middle of the screen to reveal reading options. If you find any errors, non-standard content, ads redirect, broken links, etc., please let us know so we can fix it as soon as possible. Report. Chapter 15. Questions and Answers. Gareth's rough and suspicious voice filled the cave, prompting everyone to look at Moon. Moon turned toward him, keeping his expression neutral. I received a call from nature, so I'm responding. Gareth remained silent for a moment, his gaze measuring. There's a place deeper inside the cave. We dug out a section for people to do it there. No, it's fine. I'm more comfortable doing it outside. Moon gestured vaguely toward the entrance. I don't think there's any plumbing system in this cave after all. The excuse was weak, but plausible enough. Privacy was a reasonable request. Gareth waited another moment, his weathered face unreadable. Then he nodded slowly. All right, don't take too long. It's dangerous outside. I won't. Moon walked toward the cave entrance, feeling Gareth's eyes on his back the entire way. He could sense Celine watching too, her expression curious but not alarmed. Derek and the others paid him no attention, too focused on warming themselves and recovering from the journey. Moon stepped out into the brutal cold, and the merciless cold wind hit him immediately, stealing his breath. The temperature drop was shocking even after a few hours inside the relative warmth of the cave. Snow continued to fall, thick and relentless, reducing visibility. Moon moved away from the entrance, far enough that he'd be out of direct sight but not so far that he'd lose his way back. His breath came out in thick clouds of frost. His fingers were already going numb again, but he needed to see the area around. He scanned the area around the cave entrance, looking for tracks, signs of movement, evidence of the other survivors Gareth claimed would return at night. He didn't bother looking for footprints because the snow would have covered all traces, given how heavily it was falling. The wind alone would erase any prints within minutes. After doing a circle around the area, Moon didn't notice anything strange until he stumbled on some bones partially buried in the snow. He didn't think much of it at first. It was perfectly normal to find bones around the area. This was a place filled with beasts. Once the survivors finished with the flesh and extracted what they needed, they would discard the bones nearby. They didn't have much use except for perhaps weapon creation, but if no blacksmith was present, it made sense why they'd simply throw them out rather than store them. Moon didn't dwell on it and continued his survey until he stumbled on more bones. These were larger and scattered across a wider area. He knelt down, brushing snow away from one particular piece. Is this a human skull? The discovery made him stop in his tracks. He was concerned. Finding human bones around the same area meant the bones he'd found earlier might not be from beasts at all. They might all be human remains. Moon's heart rate increased despite the cold numbing his extremities. He quickly searched the surrounding area, moving carefully through the snow, his eyes scanning for more evidence. He found more bones, lots of them. Ribs, femurs, and vertebrae still had scraps of frozen flesh clinging to them. Others were picked completely clean, and taking a closer look, comparing the proportions and structure, they were unmistakably human. What is this? Am I in a human graveyard? A frown formed on Moon's face. This was more than troubling. It was horrifying. Either Gareth and the others were using this area as a graveyard for humans who died in the hidden realm, which would make sense given the frozen ground would be nearly impossible to dig proper graves in, or there was something far more sinister happening that Moon's group was completely oblivious to. Moon straightened, his eyes moving back toward the cave entrance, barely visible through the falling snow. His mind drifted back to the iron smell inside the cave, the foul odor Gareth had attributed to unwashed clothes, the hollow eyes of the woman by the fire, the injured man who hadn't spoken a word. The fact that Gareth had been so far from the cave, supposedly hunting, but had approached them immediately when they appeared. The fact that he'd invited 9 fresh awakeners back to his shelter without hesitation. To Moon, these things didn't add up. Had he been in Gareth's shoes, he wouldn't have just invited awakeners to their base. Firstly, their goal was unknown. They could be a danger to the base. Secondly, why would they share the resources with others? Moon's hand moved instinctively to gather mana. This time, he didn't use the water element. Rather, he focused on fire, channeling the 4-element affinity that came with his copied class. Warmth bloomed in his palm, just enough to create a flame to combat the brutal cold seeping into his bones. The skill responded smoothly, proof that his proficiency with the elemental mage class was growing. But the small comfort did nothing to ease the dread settling in his stomach. Moon forced himself to breathe slowly, to calm the panic trying to claw its way up his throat. He had two options. The first was to leave and not come back. Walk away from the cave, from Gareth, from whatever was waiting inside, and strike out on his own into the frozen wasteland. But that was incredibly risky in itself. Being alone in a hidden realm with no permanent class, no one to copy abilities from when his 24-hour timer expired, would be suicidal. He needed someone with him. Even if it was just one person, having another awakener increased his survival odds dramatically. The second option was to go back and enter the cave as if nothing had happened. Pretend he'd seen nothing, act natural, and investigate further. But to do that, he needed to ensure Gareth wouldn't notice anything different in his behavior, wouldn't suspect that Moon had discovered the graveyard of bones outside their shelter. While he wasn't completely certain about his theory, every instinct screamed at him to be cautious. The bones, the smell, the missing survivors who were supposedly returning at night. After some time thinking, weighing the options against each other, Moon decided to head back. Going alone meant certain death from exposure or beasts. Staying gave him a chance, however slim, to figure out what was really happening and potentially save at least some of his group and get them out before whatever Gareth had planned came to fruition. Moon dispersed the mana in his palm and began walking back toward the cave entrance, his footsteps crunching through the snow. He forced his expression into something neutral, tired, cold. Just someone returning from relieving themselves in miserable conditions. As the cave entrance came into view through the falling snow, Moon rehearsed his demeanor. He stepped back into the cave, the relative warmth hitting him immediately. Gareth was standing near the entrance, almost as if he'd been waiting. His eyes locked onto Moon the moment he appeared. "Took you long enough." Gareth didn't blink as he spoke, his gaze on the newcomer. Moon shrugged, rubbing his arms as if trying to warm them. "It's cold out there. Didn't want to rush and slip on the ice." Gareth studied him for another moment, then nodded slowly. "Get back to the fire. You'll need your strength for tonight." Moon walked past him, feeling those eyes tracking his every movement, and returned to his spot near Celine. She glanced at him, her expression questioning. He settled back down near the fire, his mind racing through possibilities, through plans, through ways to survive what was coming when night finally fell. Share to your friends. Chapter 16. Finding something unsettling. Tip: you can use left, right keyboard keys to browse between chapters. Tap the middle of the screen to reveal reading options. If you find any errors, non-standard content, ads redirect, broken links, etc., please let us know so we can fix it as soon as possible. Report. Chapter 16. Finding something unsettling. The sun began to set, the swirling sky outside gradually darkening from pale blue to deeper shades of violet and black. Yet Moon hadn't been able to tell anybody about what he'd found. Ever since he'd entered the cave, Gareth's eyes had been on him, watchful, like a predator tracking potential prey. This made Moon even more suspicious about the bones outside. Could they have followed a cannibal to his den? The thought was horrific to contemplate, but it fit. The repeated mentions of "when night comes" also made him suspicious. Gareth had said it multiple times, always with that same ominous undertone. And with the sun setting, Moon didn't have much time left to warn the others or prepare for whatever was coming. He needed to communicate with someone. Celine was his best option. She'd shown the most awareness, the most capacity for independent thought. But with Gareth watching, any obvious attempt at private conversation would raise suspicion. So Moon decided to use the cold as a means to get closer to her. Despite feeling embarrassed about what he was about to say, this was life and death. There was no shame in survival. "Hey," Moon said, his voice loud enough for everyone to hear, projecting discomfort that came naturally given the circumstances. "I'm feeling really cold. Can we huddle closer together, so we can use our body warmth to warm each other up?" Silence permeated the air for a brief moment, which made things more awkward for Moon. John raised an eyebrow, a smirk playing at the corner of his mouth. Elara looked at Moon with barely disguised disgust, as if he were a pervert using the cold as a flimsy excuse to get what he really wanted. Even Derek's group glanced over, their expressions ranging from amused to judgmental. Celine, however, wasn't as quick to judge. She looked at Moon silently for a brief moment, her eyes searching his face. Whatever she saw there seemed to satisfy her. She motioned for him to get closer. "I'm feeling cold too. Let's do it." Moon moved immediately, closing the distance between them until they were sitting shoulder to shoulder. The body heat was actually welcome, cutting through some of the persistent cold that had settled into his bones. More importantly, he was now close enough to whisper without being overheard if he timed it right. Gareth's eyes were still on them, but his expression hadn't changed. Apparently, two people huddling for warmth wasn't suspicious enough to warrant intervention. Moon waited, letting a few minutes pass, letting Gareth's attention drift elsewhere as the man checked on the injured survivors near the fire. Then, keeping his voice barely above a breath, Moon leaned slightly toward Celine. "Outside, human bones. Everywhere," he whispered, his lips barely moving. Celine's body went rigid beside him, but to her credit, her expression didn't change. She kept her eyes on the fire, her face neutral. After a moment, she whispered back, her voice even quieter than his. "Amount. Many." Celine didn't speak after that, her eyes remaining fixed on the fire. Thankfully, she was good at concealing her emotions. After some time had passed, she stood up abruptly. "I need the toilet. Can you lead me to where you did it?" Moon nodded and stood. "Sure." Before they could move toward the entrance, Gareth's voice cut through the cave. "It's getting dark outside. You should just use the one inside the cave. It's much more dangerous out there now." Celine turned to face him, her expression calm and reasonable. "I know, that's why I wanted him to come with me. We could protect each other. Besides, he said it's nearby, so it shouldn't be much of a problem." Gareth didn't argue, but his silence was heavy, weighted with disapproval. "That's how you get yourself killed." Derek's group seemed to agree with him. Marcus nodded vigorously. "Celine, I think you should stay at least for tonight. Just bear with it. Nobody will look inside." Moon cursed the idiots inwardly. They were making things difficult, speaking as if they had zero survival instincts, as if they couldn't sense the wrongness permeating this place. "It's okay, don't worry. I'll be really quick." Celine smiled, the expression not quite reaching her eyes, before turning her back and making her way toward the exit. Moon followed immediately. As they made their way out, Moon could feel Gareth's eyes fixed on their backs, burning into them with unsettling intensity. The moment they stepped outside, Moon glanced back through the cave entrance and saw Gareth turn around, walking deeper into the cave's darkness. Outside, the cold hit them like a physical blow, worse now that the sun had set. The temperature had dropped even further. Moon immediately grabbed Celine's hand and led her toward the area where he'd found the bones, moving as quickly as the treacherous ice would allow. The wind howled around them, and visibility was barely 10 meters. He needed to be fast. Arriving at the location, Celine knelt down and took hold of one of the bones protruding from the snow. She turned it over in her hands, examining it closely despite the fading light. "This is a human's remains. You're right. What should we do? Should we go back?" Moon kept looking around, scanning for movement, for beasts, for Gareth following them. "I feel like he's already suspicious. Ever since I left and re-entered, his eyes were glued to me. I noticed that." Celine stood, brushing snow from her knees. She looked back toward where they'd come from, toward the cave entrance barely visible through the blizzard. "We can't go back. We need to find another place for now." Her voice was steady, controlled, but Moon could hear the fear beneath it. "As for the others, we'll have to leave them there for the time being. There must be a reason he hasn't acted yet. Either he's waiting for a specific condition to be satisfied, or he simply isn't strong enough to take on all of us at once." Moon nodded. "I was thinking the same. But what if these remains are simply those of deceased awakeners who died during their stay? Bodies they couldn't bury in the frozen ground. Celine shook her head slowly, her expression grim. That's possible, but it's very optimistic. Look at these bones, they have no flesh on them. Most of them are completely clean. She gestured at the scattered remains around them. This means something wiped them clean, whether a beast or... She didn't finish the sentence. You mean? Moon's eyes widened as the full implication hit him. Yes. Celine's voice dropped to barely above a whisper, as if afraid something might overhear. He might be a cannibal. Either a human native to this hidden realm who's learned to hunt awakeners and impersonate them, or he's actually one of us but has resorted to this to survive. She paused, her breath coming out in shaking clouds. Or he's giving something in sacrifices to remain alive, feeding in exchange for protection. The wind howled louder, as if punctuating her words. Either way, Celine continued, her hand tightening around her staff, we need to leave this place. Now. Moon's hand moved instinctively to gather mana, the fire element responding to warm his freezing fingers. Where do we go? We have no shelter, no supplies. The temperature will kill us before morning. I don't know, but staying in that cave isn't a good idea. At least out here we have a chance. A sound echoed from the direction of the cave. Celine's eyes immediately met Moon's, and in that moment, they both understood. They needed to run. Share to your friends. Chapter 17. Finding something unsettling. 2. Tip: you can use left, right keyboard keys to browse between chapters. Tap the middle of the screen to reveal reading options. If you find any errors, non-standard content, ads redirect, broken links, etc., please let us know so we can fix it as soon as possible. Report. Chapter 17. Finding something unsettling. 2. Heavy breathing tore through the night air as their feet crunched through the snow beneath them. Crunch, crunch, crunch. Is he following us? Moon whispered harshly, glancing back over his shoulder into the darkness. The blizzard had intensified, making it nearly impossible to see more than a few meters behind them. Celine shook her head, her own breathing ragged. I don't see anyone. They had run far from the graveyard, their legs burning from the exertion, their lungs aching from gulping down freezing air. Somehow, miraculously, they'd managed to escape without being caught. But Moon knew that didn't mean they were safe, just that they'd bought themselves time. So what do we do now? Moon asked, slowing to a walk as his stamina began to fail. His eyes scanned their surroundings for anything that could be useful for survival. Unfortunately, the view was nothing welcoming, offering no hope. Celine stopped, taking a deep breath that came out as a thick cloud of frost. The cold is getting stronger. We need to find a place to hide for the time being and light a fire. If we don't... She didn't finish the sentence. Not that she needed to. Without shelter and warmth, they'd be dead within hours. Moon nodded grimly. Let's keep moving. They embarked on a desperate search, moving through the unknown landscape, searching for a cave, an overhang, anything that could serve as shelter against the brutal cold. Crunch, crunch, crunch. There, Celine said suddenly, pointing ahead. Moon followed her gesture and saw a rocky outcropping with what looked like a small depression carved into its base. Not quite a cave, but it would provide some protection from the wind. It was better than nothing. They hurried toward it, their last reserves of energy pushing them forward. Before they were able to enter, a small beast emerged from the depression, its eyes glowing faintly in the darkness. It was no larger than a dog, with white fur that blended almost perfectly with the snow. Sharp teeth bared as it snarled at the intruders threatening its shelter. Moon and Celine didn't hesitate. Their hands moved simultaneously, gathering mana. Water balls formed in rapid succession, launching toward the creature from both directions. The attacks swarmed the small beast, overwhelming it before it could even leap forward. Had the water been from a natural source, it would have frozen solid immediately in this temperature, but conjured from mana, it retained its liquid form and force. The beast yelped once, then collapsed, its small body going still. You have killed a level 5 Hypsi. You have gained 10 lives. Moon glanced at Celine, who was already moving toward the corpse. Without speaking, they both understood what needed to be done. They quickly dragged the dead body into the shallow cave, pulling it away from the entrance to make room. The depression was small, barely large enough for 2 people to sit comfortably, but it blocked the worst of the wind. That alone made it infinitely better than being exposed. Celine knelt beside the Hypsi's body, pulling out a small knife she'd been carrying. The fur on its back, we can carve it out. Make some kind of covering for ourselves. It's not much, but it'll help. Celine explained as she harvested the fur. Moon nodded, watching the entrance while Celine began working. His hands were numb, his body shivering slightly now that the adrenaline from their escape was fading. He had 85 lives now. We still need fire, Moon said quietly. The fur will help, but without heat. I know. Celine's knife worked, separating the pelt from the carcass. But what can we burn? There's no wood here, no fuel. Moon looked at the Hypsi's body, then at Celine. Their eyes met and understanding passed between them. The meat, the bones, the body itself. It was grotesque, but it was survival. After you finish with the pelt, Moon said slowly, we can try to burn what's left. The fat should catch. It won't be pleasant, but it'll keep us alive, Celine finished. Her hands didn't stop moving. Let's do it. Moon nodded and positioned himself near the entrance, keeping watch while Celine worked. The wind howled outside, carrying with it the promise of death for anyone caught unprepared. Behind them, in that cave where the others still sheltered, Moon wondered if Derek and the rest had realized the danger yet, or if it was already too late for them. When the time came for the fire to burn, Celine set up the materials carefully. Moon noticed how she was still hiding the fact that she could use other elements beyond what she'd initially claimed. But he didn't care at the moment. There were more pressing matters to be concerned with than an awakener concealing her full strength. Sitting beside the burning body of the creature, both awakeners remained in comfortable silence. The smell was unpleasant, acrid and wrong, but the heat was precious. It kept the deadly cold at bay, kept their bodies from shutting down entirely. The wind outside howled relentlessly. The snow descended in thick curtains. The night deepened around them, hostile and unforgiving. Moon took first watch, his eyes fixed on the cave entrance, his body positioned between Celine and any potential threat. Hours in agonizing slowness, but nothing came. When his watch ended, Celine took over without complaint, and Moon allowed himself to drift into an uneasy sleep, knowing that rest was as vital to survival as warmth. The daylight emerged gradually, the swirling sky shifting from black to pale blue, signaling a new day in this cursed realm. He'd positioned himself near the entrance during the night, and luckily no beasts had approached. The small depression had remained undiscovered. Hey Celine, wake up, it's time, Moon whispered gently, moving closer to where she'd curled up against the cave wall, wrapped in the Hypsi's fur pelt. They'd split the watch time during their stay, alternating every few hours. Now it was time for both of them to venture out, to look for a better place, to figure out their next move. They'd agreed to set out early in the morning to avoid being caught outside when night fell again. Daylight offered visibility, slightly warmer temperatures, and the possibility of finding resources. Good morning. Celine's sleepy voice resonated in the small cave. She stirred, blinking against the dim light filtering in from outside. Celine sat up slowly, rubbing her arms through the fur. Any activity during your watch? Nothing, Moon replied. It was quiet. That's almost worse. Quiet means we don't know where the dangers are, Celine murmured. Moon nodded. She was right. In a place like this, silence wasn't peaceful. It was ominous. We should move. The fire's nearly out anyway. We can't stay here, he said. Celine stood, stretching her stiff muscles, and moved toward the entrance. She peered out cautiously, scanning the landscape. Where do we even go? We have no map, no sense of direction. For all we know, we could be walking in circles. Away from Gareth's cave, Moon said firmly. That's the only direction that matters right now. We put as much distance as possible between us and whatever he is. Celine looked back at him, her expression troubled. What about the others? Derek? John? Ilara? They're still there. Moon's jaw tightened. If they're still alive. Celine said nothing, but slight guilt was written plainly across her face. Moon softened slightly. If there's a chance, if we find help or figure out what's happening here, we can come back. But right now, the best thing we can do for them is survive. We can't help anyone if we're dead. Celine took a shaky breath, then nodded. You're right, let's go. They stepped out into the frozen morning, leaving behind the small shelter that had kept them alive through the night, and began walking into the unknown. Share to your friends. Chapter 18. Escaping. Tip: you can use left, right keyboard keys to browse between chapters. Tap the middle of the screen to reveal reading options. If you find any errors, non-standard content, ads redirect, broken links, etc., please let us know so we can fix it as soon as possible. Report. Chapter 18. Escaping. We've been walking for some time. Why is there nothing around us? Moon asked, his voice nearly swallowed by the freezing wind that tried to push him back with each step. Celine squinted her eyes, trying to get better vision while protecting them from the harsh wind that carried stinging ice particles. Not sure, but if this persists, we should just return. We can't wander aimlessly forever. Moon nodded, and they kept moving forward, their footsteps crunching through the deep snow. 30 minutes into their trek, Moon's foot caught something solid beneath the snow, and he almost tripped, stumbling forward before catching his balance. He looked down to find a half-buried body of an Arctic bear, its thick white fur filled with snow. The creature appeared to be dead, frozen in place, its massive form partially concealed by the drifts. Hey, check this out. Celine turned to face Moon, then her eyes widened in surprise at the sight. That's a dead bear. It looks quite large, too. She moved closer, kneeling to examine it. Let's harvest the fur. We can make proper clothes from it, better than what we have now. They worked quickly despite their numb fingers, using Celine's knife to carefully separate the pelt from the frozen carcass. The fur was thick, dense, designed by nature to survive in exactly these conditions. Once they'd carved out enough material, they fashioned crude but functional coverings, wrapping the fur around their shoulders and torsos, securing it with strips of leather. The bear fur blocked the wind far more effectively than their previous clothes ever could. After finishing, Celine and Moon continued their journey, but more carefully this time. The body of the dead bear meant predators were active in this area. The creature wouldn't have simply died from cold. This was a beast born and adapted to these temperatures. Something had killed it. Not long after, they continued, savage sounds reached them. Roar! Moon raised his hand, signaling Celine to stop. They moved cautiously toward the source of the noise, keeping low, using the terrain for cover. What they found made them both freeze. Two massive beasts locked in combat. One was another Arctic bear, even larger than the dead one they'd found, its claws the length of daggers. The other was a creature Moon had never seen before, something wolf-like but much larger, with icicles jutting from its spine and shoulders like armor. Both beasts fought with terrifying ferocity. The bear's claws tore through the wolf creature's hide, drawing blood that steamed in the cold air. The wolf retaliated with jaws that could crush bone, its teeth finding purchase in the bear's shoulder. These creatures, they would kill us easily, Moon muttered, watching the display of raw power. Either one of these beasts could slaughter them without breaking a sweat. Celine nodded slowly, her eyes never leaving the fight. This is dangerous, but it's also an opportunity. Her voice dropped to barely above a whisper. Let's wait until the right moment, then strike. When they're both exhausted. Moon nodded his head in agreement. He'd been thinking the same thing. This encounter was served on a golden platter. A chance to gain massive experience and lives without having to face either creature at full strength. They would be the third party, waiting until both combatants were weakened, then reaping the rewards. They settled into position behind a snowdrift as they watched, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. The perfect moment came when one of the beasts was about to die. Both Celine and Moon attacked. Celine's eyes trailed along the bloody gash on the beast's hide. Now, they launched their attacks from a distance, targeting the weakened beast that was on the verge of death. Their attacks swam through the air before smacking the dying beast in full force. Wail! The barrage of attacks drew out the cry of the beast, filled with agony and despair. The light in its eyes began to fade, and within moments, it was dead. The Arctic bear became furious. It had been battling the beast that had killed its kin for hours, shedding sweat, blood, and tears to overcome the challenge. And in the end, its kill was stolen. You have killed a level 8 Arctic wolfer. You have gained 20 lives. You have reached level 4. The notification flashed across Moon's eyes as the kill registered. He had gained an incredible number of lives from the kill, increasing his survivability in this place by a large margin. Before he could celebrate the achievement, a loud roar filled the area. Roar! Moon, it's coming! Celine's hurried voice entered his ears, muffling the sound of his pounding heart. Moon took a quick gulp before forming another water attack and throwing at the beast that was charging towards both of them with killing intent. Splash! Splash! Both attacks landed, slowing it down for a split moment before it continued its charge. Move back! We need to create distance. Moon did as told and immediately tried to create more distance as he conjured more spells to hit the approaching beast with. Celine did the same thing, moving back and sending her spells towards the incoming beast without delay. Despite their attempts to slow down or kill the charging beast, the Arctic bear was still able to close the distance. Within striking range, the beast outstretched its limb, ready to claw Celine's face off. Moon's eyes widened before he threw a hurriedly made water stream to distract the bear. The distraction was momentary, but it massively helped Celine to dodge the attack that would have killed her instantly. Thank you, Celine breathed out as she leapt back several feet. Moon barely had the chance to acknowledge her statement. The bear turned its full attention toward him now, its eyes blazing with fury at the one who'd interfered. Shit! Moon immediately tried to retreat, but the beast charged toward him on all fours with explosive speed, its wounded state forgotten in its rage. Within seconds, the beast was directly in front of Moon, its massive body blocking out everything else. Time seemed to slow as its claws extended in a killing arc. Moon tried to dodge, but his foot caught in the deep snow, making him stumble. No! Moon! Celine's shout was desperate, her attacks launching a moment too late to distract the beast. Share to your friends. Chapter 19. Escaping 2. Tip: you can use left, right keyboard keys to browse between chapters. Tap the middle of the screen to reveal reading options. If you find any errors, non-standard content, ads redirect, broken links, etc., please let us know so we can fix it as soon as possible. Report. Chapter 19. Escaping 2. Celine no longer held back her power, using her class to its full potential, sending multiple elemental spells, hurling towards the beast. Moon didn't have time to see what Celine was doing. All he could see was the beast before him and its incoming claws. He tried to mitigate the damage by crossing his arms before his body and, most importantly, his head. Bam! Pain erupted across his chest as the claws tore through his bare fur covering and lightweight armor like paper, raking deep furrows across his torso. At the same time, the Arctic bear defended against the attacks that Celine sent towards him by dodging and using his limbs as natural shields. The force of the blow sent Moon flying backwards, his body crashing into the snow several meters away. Blood sprayed across the white landscape, crimson red against pristine white. Gasp! A wet choke tore from Moon's throat, blood escaping his mouth in a stream that seemed endless. The metallic taste flooded his senses. His chest was torn open, ribs visible through the shredded flesh. At that moment, Celine realized that Moon was doomed. The light in Moon's eyes began dimming, his vision tunneling as shock threatened to pull him under its rug. But he refused to give up. He had 2 resurrections remaining. This death wouldn't be his last. Still, he couldn't let this one go to waste. Attack him! Moon struggled to speak through blood-filled lungs. With the last of his fading strength, he launched himself forward, grabbing onto the Arctic bear's fur and clutching it desperately. If he were dying, he'd take the beast down with him. He'd give Celine the opening she needed. Celine's eyes widened in shock at the scene. Moon, clearly dying, throwing himself at the creature that had just eviscerated him. But she understood immediately what he was doing. She formed her most powerful attacks, channeling more mana than she'd used before. Fire gathered at her fingertips, compressed and volatile. She sent them flying toward the Arctic bear that Moon was clutching. The bear tried desperately to fling Moon off its body, twisting and thrashing. But Moon had positioned himself where the creature's flexibility was limited. His grip was weak, but it held just long enough. Boom! Boom! The 2 fireballs landed on both the Moon and the bear, engulfing them in flames and explosive force. Arg! Moon screamed as the fire consumed what was left of his dying body. Roar! The bear's bellow was equally agonized, its already wounded body taking the full brunt of Celine's desperate attack. Moon felt his grip fail. His body fell away from the bear, hitting the snow with no strength left to break his fall. His vision went dark. You have died. You have lost 30 lives. The world blinked out, then snapped back into existence. To Celine, Moon's body turned into particles before reappearing once again, with no injuries. Moon gasped, his body whole again, the wounds gone. He was lying in the snow where he had died. Luckily, the bear engulfed in flames was only a few meters away from where he'd died, the resurrection placing him at a safe distance from immediate danger. His chest heaved as he gulped down freezing air, the phantom pain of his death still echoing through his nervous system even though the injuries had vanished. Ahead of him, the Arctic bear was still alive, but barely. It staggered, its fur scorched and smoking, Celine's attacks having done catastrophic damage to its already weakened state. Celine stood 20 meters away, her hands already gathering more mana, preparing to finish it. The bear took one stumbling step toward her, then another. Its eyes burned with hatred, refusing to die, refusing to let its killers escape. But Moon forced himself to stand. His legs trembled, his entire body felt wrong, disconnected, but he pushed through it. He gathered mana with shaking hands and sent another ball of water hurling toward the beast. Celine's fireball launched at the same moment. The 2 attacks collided with the bear simultaneously, water and fire meeting in a violent reaction. Steam exploded outward, the temperature differential creating a shockwave that made the massive creature stumble backwards, its already burned and wounded body unable to maintain balance. The bear's legs buckled slightly, giving them the opening they needed. Again! Celine shouted, not questioning how Moon was alive, focused entirely on finishing the fight. They threw spell after spell at the staggering beast. The barrage was relentless, neither of them giving the creature a chance to recover or mount another charge. The bear roared one final time, a sound filled with pain and defiance, before its legs gave out completely. It collapsed into the snow, its massive body hitting the ground with a heavy thud that seemed to shake the mountain itself. Then it went still. You have killed level 9 Arctic bear. You have gained 35 lives. You have reached level 5. The notification flashed across Moon's vision. He'd lost 30 from the death, but gained more than that back from the kill. Once he saw the notifications, Moon stopped channeling mana. His legs gave out, and he sat down heavily in the snow, breathing heavily, each breath painful despite his body being whole again. He was drained mentally. To feel the sensation of being burned alive on top of being mauled wasn't something you could just shake off. It had taken all of his mental energy just to stand back up and keep fighting. Celine walked toward him slowly, her expression a mixture of shock, concern, and something else. Confusion, perhaps awe. In a quiet voice, she whispered, "Moon, how are you still alive?" Moon looked up at her, still catching his breath. He could see it in her eyes. She'd watched him die, watched his chest torn open, watched him fall, watched the light leave his eyes. And she'd seen the resurrection, seen him appear whole and breathing where moments before there had been only a corpse. Nobody in their group had 30 lives. They'd been together since the beginning, had hunted the same beasts in the training grounds and the eastern woodlands. She knew approximately how many lives everyone should have. The fact that Moon had come back meant he'd had more than 30. "I'm all right," Moon said finally, his voice hoarse. Celine knelt down in the snow beside him, her eyes searching his face. "Moon, you died. I saw you die. That bear took 30 lives with that hit. Share to your friends." Chapter 20. Secrets are revealed. 1. Tip: you can use left, right keyboard keys to browse between chapters. Tap the middle of the screen to reveal reading options. If you find any errors, non-standard content, ads redirect, broken links, etc., please let us know so we can fix it as soon as possible. Report. Chapter 20. Secrets are revealed. 1. I know. I lost the majority of my lives with that earlier death. Luckily, I was able to gain some during my toilet break when I discovered the bones. Otherwise, I would have been dead by now. Moon said the lie came smoothly despite his exhaustion. He needed to deflect, to give her a plausible explanation that didn't reveal the true extent of his advantage. Before she could press further, he changed the topic. "On the other hand, I didn't know you were able to use the fire element too. I thought you were a water mage," he said with a soft smile on his face, turning the scrutiny back toward her. Celine's cheeks flushed slightly before she turned her head away. "Yeah, about that. It's okay, you don't need to explain. I'm just glad that you were able to kill it." "Thank you." Celine shook her head immediately. Without your distraction on multiple occasions, I would have been dead. When that bear was about to claw my face off, you saved me. And then you grabbed onto it even while dying." Her voice wavered slightly. "You gave me the opening I needed. I should be thanking you." Moon looked at her for a moment, seeing the genuine gratitude and guilt in her expression. She felt responsible for his death, even though it had been his choice. "We're alive," he said simply. "That's what matters. We protected each other. That's how we survive in a place like this." Celine nodded slowly, her eyes moving to the massive corpse of the Arctic bear nearby. Steam still rose from its scorched fur where her fire attacks had landed. "Elemental mage," she said quietly, almost reluctantly. "That's my actual class." Moon made his expression shift to appropriate surprise, as if this was new information. That's incredibly rare." "I know." Celine pulled her knees up, wrapping her arms around them. "That's why I didn't tell anyone at first. The moment people know you have something valuable, they start looking at you differently. Either they want to use you or they see you as a threat or..." She trailed off. "Or they target you," Moon finished. "Yeah." She looked back at him. "But after what just happened, I figured you deserved to know the truth." Moon appreciated the gesture, even if he'd already known her secret from the moment he'd copied her class. "Your secret's safe with me. We need to trust each other if we're going to survive this place." Celine managed a small smile. "Agreed." They sat in silence for a moment, both recovering, both processing what had just happened. Finally, Moon pushed himself to his feet, his legs still shaky but functional. "We should harvest what we can from the bear, and the wolf creature too. Then we need to keep moving. We're exposed out here." Celine stood as well, nodding. "Right. And we need to figure out what the exit conditions for this hidden realm are. We can't just wander forever." Moon looked out across the frozen landscape, the endless white stretching in every direction. Somewhere out there were answers. Somewhere was a way out. They just had to survive long enough to find it. Name: Moon. Race: human. Class: classless. Elemental mage. Limited. Level: 5. 66%. Lives: 110. Strength: 14. Agility: 16. Constitution. 16. Mana. 19. Attribute points. 5. Skills. Elemental attack. 4. Element affinity. Talent. Grim Reaper. Class skill. Class slot 1/1. As they harvested everything they could from the two massive beasts, meat, leather, and even some of the wolf creatures' icicles that might prove useful, Moon was checking his status. Upon reaching level 5, he'd been given an additional 5 attribute points to use, which was incredibly valuable given their situation. Moon didn't hesitate. He placed 3 into the Constitution and 2 into Mana. Constitution. 1619. Mana. 1921. He'd chosen to improve his constitution primarily because of the overwhelming weather conditions. Strengthening his body would help defend against the brutal cold that was a constant threat. Every point of constitution meant better endurance, better resistance to the elements, and better chances of surviving exposure. Secondly, mana was his main combat attribute. He was certain that the only class he would use for the foreseeable future was Celine's elemental mage class. As a mage, mana was what mattered most. More spells, stronger attacks, longer sustain in extended fights. The improvement was immediate and tangible. Moon could feel his body become slightly more resilient, the cold's bite lessening. His mana reserves expanded, giving him more room to work with. With the harvesting done, both of them bloody and exhausted, they made a decision. "We should head back," Moon said, looking at the sun's position in the swirling sky. "To the shelter we used last night." Celine nodded in agreement. "Venturing deeper isn't smart after what we just went through. We need to rest, eat, and think about our next steps." They gathered their harvested materials. Strips of meat wrapped in leather, pelts draped over their shoulders, and they began the journey back to the small cave depression they'd sheltered in the night before. The journey felt longer this time, their bodies heavy with exhaustion, their minds replaying the brutal fight. Moon's thoughts kept drifting back to the moment of his death, the claws tearing through him, the sensation of life draining away. By the time they reached the familiar outcropping, the sun was beginning its descent again. They'd been out for most of the day. They ducked into the small shelter, and Celine immediately began setting up another fire. This time, they had gathered wood from some trees they had found. Moon positioned himself near the entrance again, keeping watch while she began to cook the meat they had gathered. Once the food was cooking steadily, providing blessed warmth, they both sat close to it, letting the heat seep into their frozen bones. "We can't keep doing this," Celine said quietly, breaking the silence. "Running from shelter to shelter, fighting beasts that nearly kill us. We need a real plan. Share to your friends." Chapter 21. Secrets are revealed. 2. Tip: you can use left, right keyboard keys to browse between chapters. Tap the middle of the screen to reveal reading options. If you find any errors, non-standard content, ads redirect, broken links, etc., please let us know so we can fix it as soon as possible. Report. Chapter 21. Secrets are revealed. 2. The next day arrived with a freezing cold breeze that made their bodies shudder despite the bare fur they'd wrapped around themselves. Moon glanced at the skills he'd gained from Celine's powerful class, pulling up the details while Celine stirred awake beside the dying embers of their fire. 4. Element affinity. Rank: rare. Proficiency: 10%. Details: you have low affinity to the 4 elements. Water, earth, wind, fire. Plus 10% extra control. Elemental attack. Rank: common. Proficiency: 12%. Details: you are able to conjure an elemental attack using mana and your affinity towards the element. Plus 10% extra damage. Looking at both skills, Moon was able to conclude that the extra effects, more damage or better control, only arrived at specific milestones. His elemental attack was at 12% proficiency, but the extra damage boost had appeared at 10% and hadn't increased yet. Likely it would jump again at 20%, then 30%, and so on. Still, there was a more pressing question brewing in his mind. What target proficiency will allow me to inherit the skill completely? The question remained unanswered for the time being, but Moon knew the answer was bound to reveal itself eventually. Would it be at 50%? 100? Hopefully, I can find the answer before it's too late. Moon thought with growing concern over their dire situation. Luckily, he had found the answer to one of his old questions. He had copied Celine's class once again, and he had found that his proficiency he'd built carried over. Unfortunately, they were still unable to get a lead on what kind of conditions they needed to satisfy to escape this cursed realm. Are you ready? Moon nodded at Celine. Let's go. Both made their way out of the small cave, squinting against the harsh morning light reflecting off endless snow. The area was quite mountainous, making travel across it tedious and treacherous. Every step required careful placement to avoid slipping on hidden ice or rocks. Before venturing out, they decided to head in a different direction this time around, exploring more of the hidden realm they'd been thrown into unwillingly. Staying in one area would eventually exhaust its resources and leave them vulnerable. After hours of traveling through the brutal landscape, they came to a stop. Their cloaks and robes were sodden with snow that had formed stiff patches, but that wasn't what made them halt. Before them, bizarre three-toed animal tracks were visible in the snow, leading off into a claustrophobic forest of twisted, ice-covered trees that hadn't been visible from a distance. Beside the tracks, a bright crimson streak had been absorbed into the perfectly white snow, creating a trail of blood droplets leading into the dark woods. This is new. Should we follow it? Celine asked, kneeling to ruffle the snow near where the blood was freshest. It was still liquid, not yet frozen. Moon remained silent for a brief moment, contemplating their next move carefully. His eyes traced the tree-line, noting how the branches seemed to block out some light, creating deep shadows within. It's risky, but it's a new territory. We can't stay in that small cave forever. He checked the sky, noting the sun's position. Since the sun is still up, we can try to get some intel on the area. Learn what lives here, what resources might exist. But we stay cautious, and we turn back before it starts getting dark. Celine nodded, standing and brushing snow from her hands. Agreed. And if we run into whatever's left that blood trail and it's too strong, we run, Moon finished. With their decision made, both ventured into the forest, following the blood trail and the strange three-toed tracks, unsure of what they would encounter deep in its frozen woods. The trees closed in around them, and the temperature dropped even further in the shade. Following the tracks of the three-toed creature, they moved deeper into the frozen forest. The trees grew denser, their branches heavy with ice that occasionally cracked and fell with sounds like breaking glass. The blood trail continued, growing more sporadic, as if whatever had been wounded was either recovering or dying. Then the forest opened into a small clearing, and they discovered an abandoned camp. Moon raised his hand, signaling Celine to stop. They both crouched low, observing from the tree-line before approaching. The camp was clearly human-made. An improvised tent constructed from animal hides sagged in the center, partially collapsed under accumulated snow. A fire pit sat cold and dead, its ashes long buried. Supplies were scattered around, a broken spear leaning against a tree, a torn backpack half buried in snow, cooking equipment overturned and frozen. But there were no bodies or any signs of the people who'd made this camp. How long has this been abandoned? Celine whispered. Moon studied the scene carefully. Hard to tell with the snow covering everything. Could be days. Could be weeks. The three-toed tracks led directly through the camp, disturbing some of the scattered supplies. We should search it carefully. There might be supplies we can use. Celine nodded, though her expression was wary. What happened to whoever was here? Moon didn't answer, but they both knew that the possibilities were all grim. They approached slowly, both on high alert. Moon moved toward the collapsed tent while Celine checked the scattered supplies. The tent's entrance flap hung open, frozen stiff. Moon used his foot to push it wider, peering inside. It was mostly empty, except for the abandoned bedrolls and a few personal items. A journal, some clothing, a small pouch. Moon reached in carefully and grabbed the journal, its pages stiff with cold. He opened it, scanning the entries. His expression darkened as he read. "Celine, you need to see this," he called quietly. "Share to your friends." Chapter 22. Shocking find. Tip: you can use left, right keyboard keys to browse between chapters. Tap the middle of the screen to reveal reading options. If you find any errors, non-standard content, ads redirect, broken links, etc., please let us know so we can fix it as soon as possible. Report. Chapter 22. Shocking find. Moon opened the journal, its pages stiff from the cold and slightly damp. The handwriting was hurried, desperate in places, whilst controlled in others. He began reading aloud so Celine could hear. A day 1. We've been pulled into what appears to be a hidden realm. There are 7 of us, all from different summoning batches, different times. Some have been here for weeks already. The cold is unbearable. We found this spot and decided to make camp. Better to stay together than separate. Day 3. The nights are worse than the days. Hopefully I can make it out. Day 5. We found others today, or what was left of them. Bones picked clean, scattered around a cave entrance. The cave looked safe from the outside, warm even. But it was a trap. Something lives in these caves, something that lures people in. We're avoiding all cave systems now, no matter how cold it gets. Moon's eyes widened slightly at that entry. He glanced at Celine, who motioned for him to keep reading. Day 8. The exit conditions finally revealed themselves. A notification appeared saying we need to claim the heart of winter. No explanation of what that means or where to find it. We've decided to head toward the mountain's peak. If there's something to claim, it's probably at the highest point. Day 11. Lost Jennifer last night. She went to relieve herself just outside the camp perimeter. We heard her scream, then nothing. By the time we got there, only blood remained. We don't go anywhere alone anymore, not even 10 meters from camp. Day 14. We found a temple structure built into the mountainside, and we are contemplating checking it out. Day 19. This will be my last entry. The others have decided to enter the temple. To whoever finds this, the temple is northeast of this camp, roughly half a day's climb up the mountain. Look for stone pillars carved with frost patterns. If you're reading this and I'm not here, I either made it out or I am dead. Good luck. You'll need it. The journal ended there. Moon closed it slowly, his mind racing through the words he had read. Celine stood frozen beside him, her face ashen. A temple, the heart of winter. This is troublesome. Moon nodded grimly. We definitely can't check out that temple anytime soon. A group of awakeners that survived for so long were hesitant to attempt it. I think we should get stronger first, explore other options, and perhaps save the others if they're still alive. I agree. Celine folded her arms, thinking, do you want to check on the cave from afar? See if Derek and the others are still there? Yes. Both made their way out of the abandoned camp, taking the journal with them. They caught no sight of the three-toed creature they'd followed, but that didn't matter anymore. They'd gained something far more valuable, information about the temple, and the heart of winter that was supposedly the objective they needed to complete to escape this cursed place. The journey back took several hours, retracing their steps through the claustrophobic forest and across the mountainous terrain. They positioned themselves behind a rocky outcropping, a good distance from the cave entrance, close enough to observe but far enough to avoid detection. Then they waited, watching. Hours passed, but no movement came from the cave. No one entered or exited. The entrance remained dark and still, like the mouth of some dead thing. Something is wrong with Gareth, Celine whispered after the third hour of observation. There are no hints that any of those awakeners he spoke about even exist. We've been watching for hours and seen nothing. A thought appeared in Moon's mind, cold and unsettling. Could he have been part of that group? The one from the journal? Celine didn't respond for a moment, her expression troubled. Not sure, but this is really not good. She turned to look at Moon. Gareth isn't weak. Ever since we met him from the beginning, The way he killed that level 12 Arctic boar with ease. Moon nodded slowly. That observation matched his own assessment. That was precisely the reason why he couldn't simply alert everyone to the danger. He felt instinctively that Gareth would be able to kill them all if he wanted to. The question was why he hadn't yet. What was he waiting for? Moon's stomach turned as the pieces began connecting in his mind. "We should head back," Celine said quietly, breaking his dark thoughts. "Before it gets dark. We can't risk being out here when that thing starts hunting." Agreed. Moon took one last look at the cave entrance, at the place where Derek, John, Alara, and the others were still trapped, unaware of the danger they were in if they were even still alive. He and Celine retreated carefully, moving back toward their own small shelter, the journal's warnings echoing in Moon's mind. And Gareth, who might be the key to understanding it all, or the most dangerous predator in this entire frozen hell. Share to your friends. Chapter 23. Shocking Find. 2. Tip: you can use left, right keyboard keys to browse between chapters. Tap the middle of the screen to reveal reading options. If you find any errors, non-standard content, ads redirect, broken links, etc., please let us know so we can fix it as soon as possible. Report. Chapter 23. Shocking Find. 2. Chapter 24. A week of grinding, heading back to the cave one. Words. Chapter 24. A week of grinding, heading back to the cave one. Restore scroll position. Chapter 24. A week of grinding, heading back to the cave one. You have reached level 10. A week had passed and many things had happened during this time. Moon and Celine had continued their expedition through the frozen wasteland, constantly battling the brutal cold and the increasingly dangerous beasts that inhabited the hidden realm. They had been checking the cave every day at different time intervals, observing from their hidden vantage point. But only one person ever left that cave. Gareth, always alone, always returning before nightfall. Never any sign of the other survivors he'd claimed would return each evening. At this point, both Moon and Celine were thankful to have escaped when they did, even if guilt still gnawed at them for leaving Derek, John, Alara, and the others behind. Still, in this world, only the strongest survive. That was the harsh truth they'd learned. Name: Moon. Race: human. Class: classless. Level: 10, 6%. Lives: 1055. Strength: 19. Agility: 21. Constitution: 24. Mana: 26. Attribute points: 5. Skills: Elemental Attack, 4 Element Affinity. Talent: Grim Reaper. Class skill: Class slot 0/1. With all the beasts they'd killed over the week, Moon and Celine had both reached level 10. The progression had been brutal but steady, hunting during the day, retreating to shelter before dark, avoiding the thing that prowled at night. Finally, both skills are mine, Moon thought with satisfaction as he stared at the 2 skills that were now permanently his. It had taken several days of constant combat for his proficiency to reach maximum in both skills, resulting in his complete acquisition of them. He no longer needed to copy Celine's class to use the abilities. They were his now, independent of any borrowed power. The hard work had been worth it. For the first time, Moon was finally able to use his accumulated lives more efficiently. 4 Element Affinity. Rank: Rare. Level: 1. Evolve. Details: you have low affinity to the 4 elements. Water, earth, wind, fire. Plus 100% extra control. Elemental Attack. Rank: Common. Level: 1. Evolve. Details: you are able to conjure an elemental attack using mana and your affinity towards the element. Plus 100% extra damage. Staring at his status screen, a subtle smile formed on Moon's face. Unlike other Awakeners, for the past week, he'd been unable to evolve his skills because he'd never truly possessed them until now. Celine and other Awakeners had the ability to use the lives they'd accumulated to evolve their skills, making them stronger, more efficient, more deadly. Of course, as new Awakeners, It was generally considered wise to keep lives as a safety reserve and only evolve skills once you had a comfortable buffer. But for Moon, who had an abundance of lives thanks to his Grim Reaper talent, the calculation was different. He pulled up the evolution interface for Elemental Attack. Elemental Attack. Rank: Common. Level: 1-2. Cost: 2 lives. With over 1,000 lives in his reserves, he had more than enough to push the skill to its limits. So he did. Confirm evolution? Cost: 2 lives. Moon selected yes without hesitation. Moon watched as the notifications cascaded across his vision, each evolution costing exponentially more lives than the last. Level 1-2. 2 lives consumed. Level 2-3. 4 lives consumed. Level 8-9. 256 lives consumed. Level 9-10. 512 lives consumed. Total lives consumed: 1,022. Lives remaining: 33/1055. Skill evolution complete. Elemental Attack has reached level 10 and evolved to uncommon rank. At the end, he'd reached level 10 with the skill and spent a total of 1,022 lives. The result? It was more than satisfying. Elemental Attack. Rank: Uncommon. Level: 1. Max. Details: you are able to conjure intermediate elemental attacks using mana and your affinity toward the elements. Attacks deal significantly increased damage and possess enhanced elemental properties. Plus 200% damage. Reading through the upgraded description, Moon felt power surge through his mana pathways. The skill had evolved from common to uncommon rank, the next tier in the progression system. But he also realized something. After this evolution, the evolve option had disappeared entirely. The skill had reached its maximum potential. Uncommon rank was as far as this particular ability could grow. Moon frowned slightly. He'd expected to be able to push it further, perhaps to rare or even epic rank later on. But skills had natural limits based on their fundamental nature. Elemental Attack, despite being useful, was apparently capped at uncommon. Still, the improvements were substantial. Double damage, faster casting, better efficiency. For 1,022 lives, it was an investment that would pay off immediately. Now he had a decision to make about 4 element affinity. 4 element affinity. Rank: Rare. Level: 1-2. Cost: 8 lives. Looking at the skill, Moon's happiness faded. Starting at 8 lives for the first level up, it would cost in the 5 digits for him to evolve the skill to epic rank. Are you ready? Celine looked at Moon with a hardened expression on her face. Let's go. Moon nodded, making his way out of the cave. He hadn't powered up without reason. They were going to Gareth's cave to confront him, then they were going to head to the temple. They had been slowly accumulating strength for the past week, and it was finally time to confront him without simply providing themselves for slaughtering. Share to your friends. Chapter 24. A week of grinding, heading back to the cave. 1. Tip: you can use left, right keyboard keys to browse between chapters. Tap the middle of the screen to reveal reading options. If you find any errors, non-standard content, ads redirect, broken links, etc., please let us know so we can fix it as soon as possible. Report. Chapter 24. A week of grinding, heading back to the cave. 1. Moon and Celine stood at the front of the cave, both glancing at the small entrance with frowns on their faces. Entering was incredibly dangerous. Whoever went first would absorb any incoming attacks from within the cave, making them the most vulnerable. In the end, Moon decided to enter first. The entrance wasn't so narrow that they couldn't prepare for attacks, but it was still risky. If Gareth was waiting inside, if this was a trap, Moon would be the one to spring it. He wasn't being chivalrous, but he was being realistic. With his new skill, he could heavily injure Celine if he used it whilst being behind her, and that was a big no. Stay back, he whispered to Celine. Give yourself room to react. Silently, Moon entered first, his body tense, mana already gathered and ready to cast. Celine followed right behind him, keeping a safe distance of several meters. Having a chance to respond to any variables was crucial, especially against someone like Gareth who radiated that level 9 aura. Surprisingly, they managed to enter the cave without incident. Moon's body remained alert, his senses straining for any sound or movement. His mana churned ready, prepared to unleash his newly evolved elemental attack at the slightest hint of danger. Looking around the cave, Moon found nobody. "Where is everyone? Nobody is here," Moon muttered, his voice echoing slightly in the empty space as he surveyed the area with a grim expression. Celine shared the same reaction, her eyes scanning the cave. The fire pit was long exhausted, nothing but cold ashes remaining where flames had once burned. The injured woman and man who'd been sitting by the fire were gone. The pelts, the supplies, the makeshift bedding. All of it remained, but not a single person occupied the space. "Do you think he already?" Celine whispered, unable to finish the sentence. "Not sure," Moon whispered back, moving deeper into the cave while maintaining his vigilance. "Let's check the area deeper inside, where the supposed toilet was." Celine nodded and walked alongside him, her staff gripped tight, ready to cast at a moment's notice. They moved through the cave, checking every alcove. The stone walls pressed close around them, the torches that had provided light during their first visit now extinguished. After 5 minutes of thorough searching, the verdict was clear. The cave was completely empty. "Damn it, he must have moved at some point this week." Moon cursed under his breath as they prepared to leave the cave. More than a week had passed since they'd escaped. Plenty of time for Gareth to relocate slowly, especially if he suspected they knew something. At this point, both Moon and Celine had verified that there was indeed something deeply wrong with Gareth. The question that remained was, where was everyone? Derek, John, Elara, Marcus, Iris. Where had they all gone? Moon's eyes widened as a thought struck his mind. "The graveyard, we need to check the graveyard." Celine's face paled slightly, but she nodded. To see if there are new bones," Moon finished grimly. They exited the cave and made their way through the snow to the area where they'd originally discovered the human remains. The location wasn't far, just around the rocky outcropping where the wind had created natural drifts. Moon's heart pounded as they approached. Part of him hoped desperately that they'd find nothing new, that somehow, against all odds, Derek and the others were still alive somewhere. They arrived at the site and began searching, pushing aside snow, looking for any fresh remains. Minutes passed. "Nothing," Celine said finally, her voice carrying a mix of confusion and fragile hope. "There are no new bones. The same ones we found before, but nothing fresh." Moon frowned, his mind racing through possibilities. Either nothing happened to them, or Gareth already decided to change locations entirely, Celine finished. "If he suspected we knew about the bones, about what he was doing, he might have moved everything, covered his tracks." Moon stared at the old bones partially buried in snow, the same remains they discovered a week ago. The evidence was inconclusive. Their teammates could be alive and relocated, or they could be dead and disposed of elsewhere, or something else entirely could have happened. "What do we do?" Celine asked quietly. Moon was silent for a long moment, weighing their options. They were level 10 now, significantly stronger than when they'd first arrived. But Gareth was still estimated at level 13 minimum, possibly higher. And they had no idea where he'd gone or what his true capabilities were. "We keep getting stronger," Moon said finally. "We focus on surviving, on preparing for the temple. If Derek and the others are alive, we'll find them. If they're not..." He let the sentence hang. Celine nodded slowly, accepting the harsh reality. "The temple, the heart of winter, that's our way out." "That's our way out," Moon confirmed. They turned away from the graveyard and began the trek back to makeshift camp that they had found the journal in, leaving behind the unanswered questions and the ghosts of their former teammates. In this frozen hell, survival came first. Everything else was secondary. So they proceeded to the camp, encountering a few beasts along the way which Moon and Celine took care of easily. "You have killed level 9 Arctic boar. You have killed level 10 Arctic lynx." "Wow, Moon, you are so much stronger now. Your attacks are almost instantly killing these beasts. Did you level up your skill? Moon nodded his head. Yes, I leveled up my main skill a few times. What about you? I did too. But the effect isn't as exaggerated as yours. Well, it depends on the skill. We have different skills. So yeah, Celine nodded her head. Share to your friends. Chapter 25. Heading back to the cave. 2. Tip: you can use left, right keyboard keys to browse between chapters. Tap the middle of the screen to reveal reading options. If you find any errors, non-standard content, ads redirect, broken links, etc., please let us know so we can fix it as soon as possible. Report. Chapter 25. Heading back to the cave. 2. Strength 19. Agility 21. Constitution 24. Mana 26. Attribute points 5. Skills: Elemental Attack, Uncommon, LVL, Max. For Element Affinity, Rare, LVL .1. Talent: Grim Reaper. Class Skill: Class Slot 0/1. By the time they arrived back at the broken camp, Moon was almost at level 11 from the experience he'd gained from all the beasts they'd slain along the way. The week of constant combat had pushed both of them to their limits and beyond, forging them into harder, more capable warriors than the frightened awakeners who'd first stumbled into this frozen hell. At the camp, they sat by their small fire, the flames providing meager warmth against the relentless cold. Moon stared at his status, noting how his lives had dropped from over 1,000 to just 140. The skill evolution had been expensive, but its worth was obvious. We need to make a decision, Celine said, breaking the silence. Her face was illuminated by the firelight, exhaustion evident in the lines around her eyes. We can't keep wandering aimlessly. We need a goal. Moon nodded. The temple. We need to check it out. See what we're actually dealing with. You think we're ready? Ready. Moon let out a harsh laugh. No, but we're stronger than we were. And we have information now. The journal gave us a starting point. He looked at Celine. We don't have to attempt whatever's inside. We just scout. Learn what we can. Then we decide our next move. Celine was quiet for a moment, then nodded. They spent the next 10 minutes preparing, checking their supplies, ensuring their harvested furs were secured properly, going over what little they knew from the journal entries. The temple was northeast from the abandoned camp, roughly half a day's climb up the mountain with stone pillars carved with frost patterns. We'll leave at first light tomorrow, Moon decided. Give ourselves maximum daylight for the journey back and forth. Celine agreed, and they settled in for the night, taking turns on watch as they had every night for the past week. When dawn broke, painting the swirling sky in shades of pale blue and violet, they departed toward the mountain mentioned in the journal. Their footsteps crunched through fresh snow, their breath misting in the frigid air. The mountain loomed in the distance, its peak lost in clouds and ice. Somewhere up there, buried in the frozen wastes, was a temple that held the key to their escape and possibly their deaths. But they had no other choice. Standing still meant slow death from exposure or starvation. Moving forward meant facing whatever horrors the temple contained. Moon adjusted the bare fur around his shoulders and continued climbing, Celine at his side, both of them advancing toward their fate with grim determination. The heart of winter awaited. They arrived at the bottom of the mountain as the sun reached its peak in the swirling sky. Moon and Celine stood side by side, their necks craned back, staring upward at the massive structure that rose before them like a frozen titan clawing at the heavens. The mountain stretched impossibly high, its slopes steep and treacherous, covered in layers of pristine snow and jagged ice that glittered like shattered glass in the pale light. The only sound was the wind. It howled across the mountainside in a constant, mournful chorus, carrying with it the whisper of 1,000 deaths. The scent of pure snow entered their nostrils, untouched by warmth or life. Underneath it lurked a subtle metallic tang of ice so cold it burned, mixed with the clean emptiness of air that had never known summer. The sight was simultaneously beautiful and terrifying. The mountain's face was a masterwork. Massive ice sheets clung to sheer rock walls, creating formations that looked like frozen waterfalls caught mid-cascade. Snow drifts rose in elegant curves, sculpted by wind into shapes that seemed designed, almost artistic in a sense. The ice caught the light and refracted it into pale rainbows that danced across the white landscape. But both Moon and Celine knew that beneath that beauty lurked danger. Moon's eyes traced the lower slopes. Claw marks carved deep gouges into the ice-covered rocks, far too large to belong to anything they'd encountered so far. The marks were fresh enough that snow hadn't completely filled them, suggesting whatever made them had passed through recently. Further along, partially buried in a snowdrift, lay the frozen corpse of a massive creature Moon didn't recognize. Its body was mutilated, as if it had been thrown against the mountain with tremendous force. Ribs jutted through its torn flesh, with one of its legs missing entirely from the corpse. Whatever had killed it possessed strength that made the Arctic bear they'd fought seem like a child's toy. Celine pointed silently to a series of tracks leading up the mountain's lower path. They were enormous, three-toed like the ones they'd followed to the abandoned camp. Each print was deep enough that Moon could have fit his entire fist inside. "Something big lives up there," Celine whispered, her voice nearly swallowed by the wind. Moon nodded, his eyes continuing their scan. Blood stained the snow in several places, dark crimson against pristine white, trails leading both up and down the mountain. At this point, both awakeners realized that this wasn't just dangerous territory. It was a battlefield, a hunting ground for things that made the level 9 beasts look like prey. And somewhere up there, carved into this frozen nightmare, was a temple that possibly held their only chance of escape. Moon pulled his gaze from the mountain's peak, shrouded in clouds that swirled with unnatural patterns, and looked at Celine. Her face was pale, but her expression was resolute. "Last chance to turn back," he said quietly. Celine shook her head. "We've come this far, and there's nowhere else to go." Moon nodded, accepting her answer because it matched his own thoughts exactly. Share to your friends. Chapter 26. Heart of Winter awaits. Tip: you can use left, right keyboard keys to browse between chapters. Tap the middle of the screen to reveal reading options. If you find any errors, non-standard content, ads redirect, broken links, etc., please let us know so we can fix it as soon as possible. Report. Chapter 26. Heart of Winter awaits. They climbed for 2 hours, their path winding through narrow passages between ice-covered rocks and treacherous slopes where one misstep could send them tumbling down the mountain. The temperature dropped with each meter of elevation gained, the cold biting through even their thick bare fur coverings. Moon kept his senses sharp, scanning for threats while Celine navigated, using her experience to find the safest routes upward. They were scouting, moving carefully, avoiding anything that looked like it might house a predator. Boom! A creature erupted from beneath the snow without warning, exploding upward in a spray of white powder. It was massive, easily 4 meters long, with a body like a scaled serpent covered in ice-blue armor plating. 6 legs ending in razor-sharp claws dug into the rock face. Its head was all teeth and hunger, jaws wide enough to swallow a person whole. Frost Serpent. Level 12. Details. A non-venomous serpent that uses its stealth and overwhelming body strength to strangle its prey and feast on them. Moon's body reacted on instinct. "Left!" he shouted to Celine. Celine dove left without question, trusting his call completely. They'd spent more than a week fighting together, learning each other's rhythms, developing coordination that only came from life-or-death combat. Moon's right hand gathered fire while his left channeled water. The frost serpent lunged toward where Celine had been standing, its massive jaws snapping shut on empty air. Moon released his fire attack. The fireball that launched from his palm was enormous, as large as a car wheel, compressed and volatile. The result of his evolved elemental attack skill combined with his rare 4-element affinity. The plus 200% damage boost made the attack devastating beyond anything a normal level 10 awakener could produce. Boom! The fireball struck the serpent's armored head directly, exploding on impact with enough force to shake loose snow from the rocks above. Fire washed over the creature's ice-covered scales, steam erupting where flame met frost. The serpent shrieked, its head snapping back from the impact. Celine was already moving, her staff glowing. Earth responded to her call, the mountainside itself seeming to shift as stone spikes erupted beneath the serpent's body, driving upward to pierce its vulnerable underbelly. The creature thrashed, trying to retreat back into the snow, but Moon didn't give it the chance. His hands moved in rapid succession. Another fireball, this one aimed at the serpent's midsection, where Celine's earth spikes had already weakened its armor. Then a lance of pressurized water, striking like a spear into the same wounded area. The combination was brutal and efficient. Fire to deal massive damage, water to exploit the openings, and earth to control positioning and create vulnerabilities. Celine added her own attacks. More earth spikes, a blade of compressed wind that sliced across the serpent's flank, and another fireball that struck its tail. The frost serpent had ambushed them, expecting easy prey. Instead, it found two abnormal awakeners, a mage that could control for elements and a grim reaper that would harvest its life 5 times over. The battle lasted less than 10 seconds. Moon's final attack was another massive fireball, this one striking the serpent's head as it tried to retreat. The explosion shattered what remained of its ice armor, and the creature went limp, sliding down the mountainside before coming to rest against a rocky outcropping. His evolved elemental attack, coupled with his own growing experience, made the spells more mana efficient. Celine walked over to stand beside him, staring at the dead serpent with wide eyes. That fireball was really strong. I know, Moon said quietly. He'd already confessed to Celine days ago about his class, though he'd been strategic about what he revealed. He'd told her his class was similar to hers, an elemental mage variant that gave him command over 3 elements instead of 4. He'd chosen to claim water, fire, and earth. Water and fire for attack versatility, earth for defense and battlefield control. He'd deliberately omitted wind, because claiming to have a 4-element affinity identical to hers would have been too suspicious. The chances of 2 people having the exact same rare class in the same batch of awakeners were essentially none. His true nature, the classless anomaly that could mirror any class, the ability that let him learn skills permanently, remained his deepest secret. He trusted Celine more than anyone else in this cursed realm, but some truths were too dangerous to share unless absolutely forced. He had already learnt not to trust people easily, after his girlfriend of 2 years left him at his weakest moment. 3 elements are already incredibly rare, Celine had said when he told her. I've never heard of anyone else with multi-element affinity besides full elemental mages like me. Moon had simply nodded, letting her believe what made sense to her. Now, watching the results of his evolved skill, Celine seemed to be reassessing just how powerful his variant class actually was. We make a good team, Moon said, deflecting from the implicit question in her gaze. Yeah, we do. Celine smiled slightly, then looked up the mountain. If we can handle a level 12 ambush that easily, maybe we actually have a chance at this temple. Maybe, Moon agreed, though privately he wondered what kind of horrors awaited them if a level 12 beast was just an appetizer. They harvested what they could from the frost serpent, some of its intact scales, a portion of its meat, and continued their ascent. Share to your friends. Chapter 27. Heart of Winter awaits. 2. Tip: you can use left, right keyboard keys to browse between chapters. Tap the middle of the screen to reveal reading options. If you find any errors, non-standard content, ads redirect, broken links, etc., please let us know so we can fix it as soon as possible. Report. Chapter 27. Heart of Winter awaits. 2. As they ascended the mountain, the weather suddenly turned violent. Whoosh, whoosh. What had been a steady wind transformed into a howling gale within seconds. Snow that had been falling gently became a wall of white that obliterated visibility. The temperature plummeted even further, cold so intense it felt like knives cutting through their layers of fur and into their skin. Moon grabbed Celine's arm, shouting to be heard over the roar of wind. "We've been hit by a blizzard. We need to take shelter." Celine nodded, her face already covered in frost, her hair whipping wildly. They pressed forward, each step becoming a battle against the wind that seemed determined to throw them off the mountain. Rumble, rumble. Their faces turned pale at the ominous sound that was coming from the top of the mountain. "Avalanche!" Celine screamed, pointing upward. Through the blizzard, Moon could barely make out the massive wall of snow breaking free from the upper slopes, cascading downward with the force of a tidal wave. With few seconds to move, they were forced to find a shelter to escape their imminent death. There, Moon spotted a dark opening in the rock face about 20 meters to their right. They ran, stumbling through the deep snow, the rumble growing louder. The ground shook, the air filled with the thunder of countless tons of snow racing down the mountain. They threw themselves into the cave entrance just as the avalanche roared past them in fury, the displaced air creating a pressure wave that knocked them both off their feet. Snow poured into the cave's mouth, but the angle of the entrance protected them from the worst of it. For several seconds, they lay gasping on the cold stone floor, hearts pounding, listening to the avalanche rage outside. When it finally passed, leaving only the howl of the blizzard, they slowly picked themselves up. "That was close," Celine breathed, brushing snow from her face. Moon nodded, still catching his breath. He looked around their shelter, gathering a small flame in his palm to provide light. The cave was larger than their previous shelter, extending back into darkness. As his eyes adjusted and the firelight spread, Moon noticed something. This cave had been used before. Near the entrance, scattered across the stone floor, were the remnants of an old fire. Moon knelt beside them, touching it gently. "Someone camped here," he said. Celine moved deeper into the cave, her own light source illuminating the walls. "Moon, there's more." He joined her and found what she'd discovered. Belongings left behind, forgotten or abandoned. A torn piece of fabric that might have been part of a bedroll. An empty water container, cracked from the cold, and a broken knife, with a blade that was snapped in half. And on the cave walls, writing. Moon brought his flame closer, studying the marks carved into the stone. They were rough, done with something sharp, probably the same broken knife lying nearby. Unfortunately, they were incomprehensible, providing no useful intel to Moon. "Can you read any of this?" Celine asked, running her fingers over the carvings. Moon shook his head. "No, but look at this." He pointed to one section where the carving was deeper. The pattern repeated 3 times, each iteration slightly different. Whoever wrote this was trying to communicate something, important enough to carve it into stone. "The journal," Celine said suddenly. "The group from the journal. They came this way, heading toward the temple. This could be one of their camps." Moon considered that. The belongings looked like they'd been here for months, maybe more. The journal's last entry had been 19 days after the group had entered the hidden realm. But why write in symbols no one can read? Moon wondered aloud. Maybe they couldn't, Celine suggested. Maybe something about this place, about the mountain or the temple, affected them somehow. Changed how they perceived language. It was a disturbing thought. Moon moved to the cave entrance and looked out. The blizzard showed no signs of stopping. Snow fell so thick he couldn't see more than a meter beyond the opening. The sky, what little he could glimpse through the whiteout, was darkening. Night was beginning to fall. "We can't go back down," he said quietly. "Not in this weather. Not in the dark." Celine joined him, her expression grim. "We'll have to stay on the mountain and wait it out." It wasn't what they'd planned. Their strategy had been to scout during daylight and retreat to safety before evening. Moon turned back to survey their shelter. It was defensible, with one entrance, solid stone walls, and enough space for both of them. They'd also harvested meat from the frost serpent. They could survive the night here. "We take shifts," Moon said, making the decision. "For hours each. The one on watch stays near the entrance, ready to wake the other at the first sign of anything." Celine nodded. "I'll take first watch. You need to recover your mana after that fight." Moon didn't argue, He wasn't going to complain about resting after their long journey. He settled against the cave wall where he could still see the entrance. And Celine? If you see anything at all, wake me immediately. Don't try to handle it alone. I won't, she promised. Moon closed his eyes, but sleep didn't come easily. Outside, the blizzard raged on. Somewhere in the darkness, carved in symbols they couldn't understand, was a message from people who'd walked this path before them. People who'd never made it back. Share to your friends. Chapter 28. Incoming Trouble. Tip: you can use left, right keyboard keys to browse between chapters. Tap the middle of the screen to reveal reading options. If you find any errors, non-standard content, ads redirect, broken links, etc., please let us know so we can fix it as soon as possible. Report. Chapter 28. Incoming Trouble. After surviving the night, morning finally arrived. The blizzard had stopped. The howling wind had faded to a gentle breeze, and pale light filtered through the cave entrance, or what remained of it. Previously, the snow had completely covered the opening, sealing them inside like a tomb. Moon and Celine worked together to clear it, using fire magic to melt through the packed snow and physically digging out the rest. Took some work before they finally broke through. When they emerged into the morning light, they stopped and stared. The mountain had transformed. The avalanche hadn't just passed by their cave. It had fundamentally altered the entire landscape around them. The path they'd climbed yesterday was gone, buried under meters of snow and ice. Entire sections of the mountainside had been reshaped, creating new slopes, new cliffs, new obstacles that hadn't existed before. "We can't go back the way we came," Celine said quietly, surveying the destruction. "That route doesn't exist anymore." Moon nodded grimly. They were committed now. The only way was up. Then Celine's hand shot out, gripping his arm. "Moon, look!" She pointed upward, and Moon followed her gaze. The blizzard had cleared completely, leaving the sky that strange swirling blue-white color that passed for daylight in this realm. And there, carved into the upper reaches of the mountain, barely visible through wisps of remaining cloud, were stone structures. Massive pillars that rose like fingers of giants, their surfaces covered in frost. Before them stood the temple. They were closer than they'd realized. The blizzard and avalanche had actually pushed them nearer to their destination, cutting away the long approach they would have needed to make. "We're almost there," Moon breathed, a mixture of hope and dread settling in his chest. Celine continued staring upward, her body tense. "Moon, I saw something, just for a moment." "What?" Moon's eyes scanned the area around the temple pillars. A silhouette, moving between the pillars. Human-shaped, I think, but... She squinted, leaning forward. "It's gone now." Moon looked where she'd indicated, his eyes looking for anything. He saw nothing but stone and ice and the ever-present snow. "Are you sure?" he asked. Celine hesitated, doubt creeping into her voice. "I thought I did, but maybe it was just a shadow, or the clouds moving." Moon continued watching for another full minute, but nothing appeared. Still, Celine wasn't the type to imagine things, especially not after a week of constant vigilance had honed her instincts to razor sharpness. "We stay alert," he said finally. "If there's someone up there, we'll find out soon enough." Celine nodded, though her hand remained tight on her staff. The climb was treacherous. The avalanche had created unstable snowfields that could give way without warning. Ice sheets clung to rock faces at angles that seemed to defy physics. More than once, Moon had to use his earth magic to create handholds, or Celine had to melt a path through ice too thick to break manually. But they climbed. The temple pillars grew larger as they approached, revealing details that hadn't been visible from below. The frost patterns weren't natural. They were carvings depicting scenes Moon couldn't quite make sense of. He squinted at the nearest pillar as they drew closer, trying to understand what the craftsman had been trying to convey. Figures that might have been human, or might have been something else, were carved in procession along the stone surface. They were stylized, their proportions slightly wrong, as if the sculptor had been working from memory rather than life. Each figure appeared to be carrying objects held high above their heads as they marched toward a central point in the carving. Moon's eyes followed the procession to where it led. A massive throne carved with excessive detail that stood out even among the drawings covering the rest of the pillar. And seated upon that throne was a being that made Moon's skin crawl despite being nothing more than carved stone. It was humanoid with odd proportions. It had 2 arms, 2 legs, a torso, and a head. It was really tall, very thin, with limbs that bent at angles that shouldn't be possible. The head was crowned with something that might have been ice or horns or both. And even in stone, even weathered by perhaps uncountable years of frozen wind, there was something in the carving's posture that radiated dominance. Before this throne, at its base, was an altar. The procession of figures appeared to be placing their offerings upon it. One by one, their carved faces turned upward toward the seated being as if in supplication or terror. Moon shifted his attention to the next pillar and found similar scenes. Different figures, different offerings, but always the same throne. Sacrifices, Celine whispered, coming to stand beside him. She'd been examining a different pillar but had clearly reached the same conclusion. They're offering sacrifices to whatever that thing is. Moon nodded slowly. This had been happening for a very, very long time. The heart of winter, Moon said quietly, his eyes returning to the carved being on the throne. I think we're looking at it. Celine's face had gone pale. If that's what we have to face to get out of here. Between the pillars, barely visible in the shadows cast by the massive stone structures, was an entrance. A doorway leading into darkness, its threshold marked by more of those intricate frost carvings. Whatever answers they sought, whatever horrors awaited them, lay beyond that entrance. After a short climb, they were at the entrance of the temple. Tap, tap. Sounds of boots striking the floor echoed from inside the temple, making Celine and Moon tense immediately. They hadn't expected to hear sounds of boots that most definitely would come from humans from inside the temple. There are people inside this place, Moon whispered to Celine beside him. From their current point, it was difficult to tell who was inside because all they could see was a dark corridor leading to what appeared to be a room without a door. The sounds were presumably coming from that room that they could barely see inside. Celine nodded her head. Should we go in? After a moment of contemplation, Moon responded. We don't have a choice, do we? With pounding hearts and tense bodies, they entered the temple, ready to face whatever was inside, whether evil or good. They slowly walked through the temple, afraid of making any sounds, wanting to get a hint of who was inside before making any move themselves. When they arrived at the end of the corridor, the sight that greeted them inside the room shocked them to their core. John! Alara? Celine whispered, her eyes wide in shock. The last people she expected to see inside the temple were the 2 teammates who they had thought were dead by now. Share to your friends. Chapter 29, Shocking Discovery. Tip: you can use left, right keyboard keys to browse between chapters. Tap the middle of the screen to reveal reading options. If you find any errors, non-standard content, ads redirect, broken links, etc., please let us know so we can fix it as soon as possible. Report. Chapter 29, Shocking Discovery.
一录2分钟，马上还有10秒。 可以录2分钟，
还没好。
马上还有10秒。